imminent risk to the health of the attendees. Therefore, no physical meeting location will be available. To access the meeting remotely, you can join from a PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or Android device using the URL that's on the agenda and on the website of the PAB. If you do not wish for your name to appear on the screen, use the drop-down menu and click on Rename to rename yourself to be anonymous. To request to speak, use the raise hand icon on the screen. To join by phone, you can dial the number that's on the agenda and enter the meeting code there. If you wish to comment during the public comment portion of the agenda, press *9 and wait to be recognized. Shall we do roll call?
Yes.
Chair Lee?
Director. Board Member Calita?
Director Lee.
Here.
Chair Chang?
Here.
Board Member Harris?
Here.
Board Member Lefwich?
Here.
Board Member Levine?
Here.
Board Member Mizell?
Here.
Board Member Moore?
Here.
Board Member Owens?
Here.
Board Member Ramsey has an excused absence, and our alternate is here today, Board Member Batista.
Here.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Approval of agenda. Are there any questions or comments on the agenda from the last meeting? I'm sorry, for the agenda for this meeting.
I had a suggestion,
Yes.
and that was that we move 10C under new business, receive update from police department regarding arrest of suspect in mass shooting plot, up to agenda item 7, which is the chief of police's report, including crime cases of interest.
To have a
Unless
conversation.
there's some
during that
reason
time.
to have it as a separate new business item.
Because we thought, the chair and I thought it could go long, and so we thought it was more suited for an agenda item. There's nothing, and the reports are not scheduled for discussion and action. So just in case you wanted to take some action. So that's why, but I have, it's the board's decision, but I have no problem with moving it as you suggested.
Okay, so if we were to move it up to, aside from the time constraints, if we were to move it up to the chief of police report, are we constrained in any manner with any type of motion?
Well, what I would suggest is you move it after, and then so it's still a new business item for discussion and action.
You mean it's right after the chief of police report,
Right.
like 8, basically.
Between
replace
7 and
7.
8.
I'm sorry,
you
what
guys think?
item are we moving?
Oh, 10C,
C.
that's the update on the arrest of the student at Berkeley High School.
Is there a new agenda? Because my agenda doesn't have a 10C.
Yeah, mine doesn't either, but it was,
No,
Yeah,
I-
it was
I
amended.
issued
And
confused.
There was a revised agenda that was issued,
Oh,
which was
I
only,
sent that out, yeah.
it
it was
was
just that.
emailed, it was not snail mail.
That's right. The incident, the reporting of the incident emerged after Director Lee sent out her
Right.
agenda.
Hard
And
copy.
it was generating a lot of interest at the school board and in general around town, of course.
The revised agenda is on the website.
thank you.
Mhm.
is that the
So why don't
only
we-
item that's been added?
Correct.
Exactly. Let's move it to where 8 is. How's that?
To between 7 and 8.
Yes,
How about 7.5?
7.5. Good idea. What, do we need like some kind of motion for that, or?
Yeah, I think we could consider that a motion from Board Member Lefwich.
Okay, someone second.
I second.
Great. Are there any objections? So moved. Okay, and not hearing any seeing any objections. So moved. Okay, so moving on. Any other issues with the agenda? Questions?
Chair, if you could just introduce or just state for the
Oh, yeah.
record that for the BPT, Lieutenant Rittenhouse is here, and from the City Attorney's Office, James Chang.
Absolutely, yes. Lieutenant Rittenhouse is here. Thank you for joining, Lieutenant. And James Chang for the first time is joining us. No relation, very popular last name. from the city attorneys. And I think James is new to the city attorney's office. Great, nice to have you on board. I don't think there's anybody else. Okay, great, thanks for the reminder. And we're on to public comment. I'm going to share my screen for the timer. There we go. Okay.
Okay, first person with their hand raised is Rivka Palatnik.
Okay. Oh, Ms. Palatnik, would you like to speak?
Yes, I just had to unmute. 1 second. Just, I have my comments written and I have them obscured. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. As a public member of the PAB's Director Search Subcommittee, I only can speak at the beginning of the meeting before these matters come up on tonight's agenda, but I do want to speak up. Although our subcommittee did get to give some input to the buyers group in the initial stage of the Director Search process, namely expressing to them the background and qualifications we thought were important for the position, we have not been given any input at all in reviewing the actual applicants or in narrowing down the pool of applicants, which has been done, as far as we know, exclusively by the buyers group. The next step in the process is supposed to be quoting from the contract with buyers that, quote, the most qualified short-listed candidates are presented to the mayor and city council in closed session. The mayor and city council selects candidates for formal interviews. Okay, so we do not know whether that selection for the interviews has happened yet. However, we just found out that the interviews will be conducted on Wednesday, June 22nd, all day. So now I'll address the matter of who will be on these panels for the interviews. The contract with buyers states in the last step of their search timeline that, quote, top candidates participate in interviews with mayor and city council and PAB subcommittee. However, the latest word we've had, 1 second, the latest word we've had from, sorry, I'm losing my place here, from Deputy City Manager Bello is that there will be 3 panels. 1, a PAB panel with 3 board members plus 2 people from other cities who are involved in police oversight. 2, a panel of community members chosen by the city manager. And 3, a panel of city personnel. This goes against the contract and also breaks with prior oral statements that the whole search subcommittee, which has 5 members, would take part in interviewing. As a community member who was very involved in helping develop Measure II, getting it on the ballot, getting it approved by the voters, and working for its full implementation, I volunteered for the PAB Director Search Subcommittee. I've been very active in the subcommittee and have attended.
Is everyone able to
You could-
hear? I'm having a sound issue.
Oh,
Yes.
do I need to go back?
Sorry, hang on a second.
Sorry, do I need
I
to
can
go
hear.
back
I'm having a bit of a sound issue. Apologies.
still?
I can hear.
Hold
I
on.
can hear
Let's
also.
try to see if I can get it back on.
Mm-mm. Are you back?
Okay. You guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, somehow I'm not
Yes.
able to hear you. Sorry about that.
Okay. Can I continue and can I just finish what I have to say? Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can
Yes.
hear you.
Chair?
Just- I don't think the
Shall I
chair
go?
can hear it, that's
I-
all.
I want to get my full time.
Okay.
Shall I proceed yet?
Yeah. So, where did it cut you off at a? It did. Okay.
I don't know when you stopped being able to hear me, but I
No,
only have,
I think it was just you, Chair. I could hear Ms. Palatnik.
Okay.
And I could too.
Okay,
Okay,
let's
sir.
just have her finish, although, Ms.
Let
Palatnik,
me-
I think your time was getting close up or close to it.
Yeah, I was-
okay, but I had technical difficulties and I don't have much more to say. Let me say it quickly. So
Okay.
the three panels that goes against the contract and breaks with oral statements that the whole search subcommittee, which has 5 members, would take part in the interviewing. And as a community member who was very involved in helping develop Measure II, getting it on the ballot, getting it approved by the voters, and working for its full implementation, I volunteered for the PAB Director Search Subcommittee. I've been very active on the subcommittee and have attended virtually every meeting of the whole PAB. I don't think I should now be excluded from the promised participation in these interviews. Finally, the only thing that the charter says about this whole DPA selection process is that, quote, to the extent possible, the city manager shall recommend 3 candidates for consideration by the city council. The city council shall appoint the director at a noticed public meeting. There's nothing said in the charter or in the contract about the way in which the views and recommendations of the panels will be recorded or presented to the city manager or the mayor and council. This makes it all the more, this is final paragraph, this makes it all the more important that the PAB highlight the fact that an important aspect of Measure II is for the director to be independent of the city manager. So please help make it happen that the recommendations of key stakeholders, in particular the PAB and representatives of the community, are given due weight in the recommendations of the city manager and in the hiring decision by the mayor and council. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Have we got
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Charles Clark?
Charles Clark? Mr. Clark, would you like to proceed?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Director, and members of the board, I am Charles Clark, a resident of City Council District 6. My subject tonight is item 10B, the controlled equipment impact statements. I think this board should, with one exception, approve the impact statements for consideration by the City Council at its meeting next Tuesday, June 14th. The exception is the impact statement concerning tear gas, starting on page 44 of tonight's packet. We all recall that in June 2020, the City Council prohibited the use of tear gas in Berkeley. To reflect that fact, at the bare minimum, the use paragraph on packet page 46 needs to be revised. What we have all likely forgotten is that the Police Review Commission and the Council's Public Safety Policy Committee both gave a positive recommendation to a limited exception for the Special Response Team to use tear gas in case of a barricaded suspect. The Public Safety Committee may put that before the Council in coming days. There does seem to be some inconsistency among the various legal requirements, the city's Controlled Equipment Ordinance and the state's AB 48 and AB 481. That seems to be mostly a fly-specking exercise that does not reach to the substance of these impact statements. The main source of opposition to what the police department has submitted appears to be what the meaning of impact is, so that's what I'll talk about with the remainder of my time. I think the correct standard should be to ask what a reasonable person would think about our police officers carrying rifles or any of the other equipment in these impact statements. A reasonable person is not an outraged paranoid, not a wilting lily, not a vindictive busybody. And our police officers simply cannot control the reactions of bystanders to the weapons they carry. The last time I saw our officers display Colt rifles was at the Solano Stroll 3 years ago. They displayed them to deter a copycat of the mass shooter at the Gilroy Garlic Festival 6 weeks earlier. That gunman killed 3 and wounded 17 before killing himself, shooting off more bullets in 1 minute than our police department has fired in 22 years. More recently, this board should visit the 47 cases where controlled equipment was deployed in 2021, which you can find in the annual use report at pages 139 to 145 of the packet. Ask yourself, what alternative means would be reasonable for our officers to use? And if you ask them about that, we live in a Berkeley with guns and other weapons and occasionally violent people. Our officers are governed by strict policies on use, which it appears outside interveners want to complexify to the point of incoherence. So when all of this is over, please give our officers the tools they need with instructions they can understand. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have,
Barb
Barb.
Atwell.
great. Ms. Atwell, would you like to speak?
Yes, hello, I'm Barb Atwell, a Berkeley resident and a member of the Berkeley Friends Racial Justice Action Team. I'd like to make some comment on the work being done on the military equipment. First, I'd like to recommend that you make the impact statement for chemical agents and impact munitions conform to the Berkeley's tear gas ban and the restrictions of AB 48. Directly in the impact statement. Number two, I recommend that you reject the impact sections for each type of equipment in the impact statement, since the police department only lists positive impacts and there are no negative ones. Number three, I recommend that the Police Accountability Board review the AB 481 use policy after the ordinance review is complete. And also, lastly, I recommend that you refer the AB 481 military equipment policy to a committee. And I'd like to suggest the Lexipol subcommittee. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And next we have service meetings, NCR, NFG.
I'm sorry for the label. This is Wendy Alfson from District 4. Also a member of the Racial Justice Action Team. Here to support that the PAB recommended to City Council that the work on police equipment be found to be incomplete. And rather than send it as inadequate, precluding use, that you urge the council to only adopt the ordinance impact statements contingent on amendment, and recognize that the annual report be reviewed by you at your June meeting, and the 481 policy over the summer, as council has until the end of October. That's number 2 and 3 of your subcommittee recommendations. The impact statements are missing negative potential impacts, contrary to one of the prior speakers. All potential impacts, as your subcommittee recommendation number 1 notes, are required by the ordinance, and what any bystander, the impact on them is part of that assessment. Number 2 is the tear gas policy, and number 3 is impact projectiles and launchers. That language is legally non-compliant with AB 48, so it should be amended to explicitly state that the use is prohibited by state law. There's language submitted by AFSC on pages 2 and 3 that would recommend that you include as part of the recommended amendments. The use of assault rifles, both patrol and sniper, should be included in the prohibited, to list those uses which are prohibited, and to detail for pre-planned operations factors, including by incorporating the Oakland patrol rifle and armored vehicle policy descriptions. The 50 caliber Barrett rifle is already unused, so we're recommending that you prohibit its use, recommend an adoption of a prohibition of use and a dispose within 90 days recommendation. We don't need this tripod and haven't used it in 15 years. And finally, on the patrol rifles, to limit the use and deployment of them, particularly listing the prohibitions such as not to use them at recruitment and public relations events, not for crowd control or for routine patrol operations. There's language at page 5 of the AFSC memo, which would cover that. Thank you very much for your time and your hard work on all of this.
Thank you. Next, we have John Lindsay Poland.
Good evening, everyone. John Lindsay Poland with the American Friends Service Committee. Thank you for all your hard work. I want to note that the subcommittee ran out of time. And the Accountability Board is going to run out of time on the current schedule unless Mr. Chang, the other Mr. Chang from the City Attorney's Office, has a different calendar for you. So in that respect, it's super important that the recommendations that you come up with tonight on 10B are clear, that they give a path to the council for how to respond to the multiple requirements that are before them. For example, that whatever you're not able to finish in the timetable for the ordinance, that have a pathway. And I hope that you will seriously consider that and give clarity to that. If you have time to amend, you could give an instruction to the council, a recommendation to the council that it amend or give an instruction to you to amend the impact sections, the tear gas section, the impact projectiles, and the assault rifles particularly. Others have talked about the tear gas ban. I would note that that ban has been incorporated into the department's use of force policy. And so if in order to actually honor that, it's totally incoherent to have an underlying policy, which is policy 303, that spells out authorized uses for that equipment. It did have an authorized use for crowd control that has now been amended, but even so, any authorized use under the current use of force policy, under the current action by City Council, is not coherent. Finally, AB 48 significantly changes the state law for use of force, especially for crowd control, for chemical agents, and impact projectiles. That guidance is more than a fly spec exercise. It is a serious change in policy that should be reflected in the policies that are referenced in this impact statement. If you look in the appendix, that's where all the underlying stuff is. That's where the substance is. And if that substance is still inconsistent with state law or with other guidance from either this board or from the City Council, then it is not coherent. And then one more thing is that the impact section on assault rifles, in addition to the impact of display, the impact of firing the weapon is significantly different when it impacts a human body than other types of firearms, as we've seen from the shootings in Uvalde and Pulse nightclub and other places, and trauma surgeons can identify. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Moni Law. Moni, would you like to speak?
Yes, please, briefly. I just thank you for your.
Nope, Moni, we can't hear you.
Sorry, no, my mistake.
That's okay. We're going to start again, Ms. Law.
Okay, I hit unmute. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I guess it was on your end. I just wanted to briefly state the importance of ensuring the appropriate level of use of force policy. Sorry, my KPFA came on. That reduce and eliminate harm. And those were created after litigation in federal court that I am the named plaintiff, Law versus City of Berkeley, and the Black Lives Matter incident, as you all probably know, where tear gas was used, flashbangs were thrown at my feet. I was not hit by tear gas, but others were. I was hit by a police baton. All of these things are important to carefully craft and implement in a way that eliminates harm, not imposes more harm. I'm very concerned should your entity not create the right policy or guidance for the council, that we could have another incident as bad, if not worse, than the one where people were shot in the knee and bashed in the back and flashbangs thrown at their feet and tear gas filling the streets of Telegraph and throughout the city of Berkeley. That was completely out of hand, and we need to ensure that that never happens again. So please keep the ban on tear gas. Please keep use of force policies appropriate, and crowd control can be done in a de-escalating way and not escalated by the police. Thank you.
Thank you. That looks like the last person. Is that correct, Director Lee?
I see no more raised hands.
Okay, I'm going to stop my sharing, revert back to the next agenda item, which is approval of the minutes from our regular meeting of May 25th, 2022. Are there any questions or comments on the minutes from May 25th, 2022? I'm not seeing any. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Board
Second
Member
that.
Hannah. Who was seconding?
That was me, Regina.
Yeah, you're first, right?
She was the mover. I believe it was Board Member Leftwich was the seconder.
Is that correct, Board Member Leftwich? Yes?
That was correct.
Okay, good. Great. Are there any objections? No, not seeing or hearing any. So moved. And moving on to the chair and board members' reports. I don't
I'm
have
sorry,
any.
because I wasn't here in the last meeting. I'm going to abstain from that vote.
Oh, sure, of course. Thank you.
Ms. Lee, can I abstain as well? I'm sorry. I don't think I was at that meeting.
Okay.
That's right. Board Member Mizell is not there as well. Thank you. So noted. Otherwise, by consensus, not by consensus, but no objections or hearing otherwise. So moved with that correction. Chair and board members' reports. I don't have a report of my own. We can move on to other board members' reports.
If anybody has any.
If anyone has any, yeah. Does anybody have a report to report out?
Well, I do, but I'm going to ask that it be combined with the 10A, which is regarding director search.
Okay. That'll be done at 10A. I'm not seeing or hearing of any other board members who would like to report out. So let's move to the Director Lee's report.
Thank you, Chair. We had one new complaint filed since your last meeting, and that complainant requested mediation. So it's now going to, notice of that request is going to the subject officer to accept or not. I was invited to a celebration in San Leandro to celebrate the establishment of civilian oversight in that city. One of the principal members of the community who was advocating for it is a former PRC officer named Robert Bailey, who now lives in San Leandro. And so he invited me to come. The flyer said, it gave the time and the date and said there would be guest speakers to be determined. And then I turned out to be one of the guest speakers. So, but it was a way of thanking me. He also, Barbara Attard, former PRC officer and still very active in NACOL, was also there. And he asked us to say a few words about, he thanked us for providing advice and guidance along the way. And then he just asked us to talk a little bit about the significance of that moment for them. But really it was most moving to hear from Addie Kitchen, who is the grandmother of Stephen Taylor, who was shot by San Leandro police and shot and killed by San Leandro police. And she really had put a lot of effort into the movement as well. Unfortunately, it is incidents like that that often lead to the establishment of civilian oversight. But all in all, it was, you know, it was pretty well attended and people were very enthusiastic, and so it was a lot of fun. So I had emailed the board, and I wanted to let the public know that you know, my contract ends on June 30th, and there won't be a permanent director in place by then. So the agreement that I've reached is to go for another month, but I will be cutting back on my hours and using vacation time to fill in the rest of those hours. And that will serve the purpose of having somebody in place while we await a permanent director, but also serve my own interest in really trying to pull back from work, which I've been trying to do for several months now. And I will be on vacation from June 17th to the 21st. And that's it for me, Chair. Oh, I also want to note Ms. Benima Thomas of investigator in our office is present too. I see a couple raised hands.
Yes.
Who was first?
I think Board Member Leftwich.
Board Member Leftwich.
Yes. I was wondering if you might be able to give us an update on the investigations that the board had asked for. You know, there was the one regarding the incident.
There were
at
2
Alta
death
Bay.
cases, right?
Yeah.
The one involving the inebriated man is proceeding, and you know, interviews have been set up, and we've gotten a lot of documents and a lot of body-worn camera footage and footage from the jail. So the investigation is underway, and I think we might have be bringing findings and recommendations to you next month on that case. And the other one, there still is, Ms. Thomas, help me out if I misspeak, but I think that that's still under criminal toll because there's still a criminal case underway. There's criminal tolling in place as well. So
when there's tolling, you're still allowed to proceed with your investigation though, right?
No, we're not.
Oh, you're not. I thought that just was a mechanism that gave the complainant more time. I didn't realize that it was
actually there are 2 kinds of criminal tolling. One tolls the time to file, and then the other tolls the time to complete our investigation.
But you're saying that by virtue of the tolling, you are prevented from investigating?
Our regs say that we shall, I don't have it in front of me, but I think there is shall language about the investigation not proceeding.
Okay.
Shall be
Thank you.
suspended, I think, something like that.
Okay, thanks.
Board Member Calavita?
Was that there was another one regarding the Alta Bates.
Yeah, that's the one that's told for criminal investigation.
Oh, okay. Because that individual is deceased, right?
Right.
Okay. Board Director Lee, are you able to say what body is conducting the criminal investigation? That's okay. If you don't think you can, then that's
well, I'm not 100% positive, but Ms. Thomas may know. Okay.
we want to. Well, yeah, that's okay, but I don't want to, breach any type of privilege or otherwise. Okay, so let's move on to Board Member Levine.
Yeah, it's on the same question about tolling. If there's complete inability to investigate in a case that might allege some serious misconduct. True or not true, we don't know. And months go by, it may not be possible to find or get meaningful interviews with percipient witnesses. It would seem to me that tolling is a mechanism to protect in a pending criminal case where the complainant is protected from giving a statement that might implicate his or her Fifth Amendment rights. But it seems as though it couldn't possibly prohibit the director and investigator from interviewing witnesses and gathering documentary evidence, such as medical records or something that might be important to corroborate the claim.
Let me get my hands on my regs unless Ms. Thomas has hers right there to read I think it would be helpful to actually read the.
Yeah, thank you.
You're talking about the interim regs, because I don't.
Yes, that's what applies right now.
Yeah.
It's in section C, 2C, 1A. It said the ODPA shall not commence an investigation until the criminal matter is adjudicated or dismissed. So it says they cannot commence an investigation. That's in our interim regs.
Yes, I knew it was directory. There's no discretion there as to whether or not we're going to go forward.
What would the rationale be for no investigation? Because totally.
Well, I think what you pointed out, and for a complainant who is living, who is the subject of the criminal matter, that makes sense. So in this case, I don't know if the regs were written with this sort of case in mind. So that's a good question.
Are you, when you talk about this case, are you referring to the Alta Bates case?
Yes.
I guess what you're saying is the inference is that somebody is accused in the events that led to this man's death. But if it's told for his benefit or her benefit, that's not the complainant.
Right.
In the death case, we're the ones who initiated the investigation, and tolling would be to the detriment of getting the truth in a prompt manner. So I'm concerned about that. I can't imagine that's what the intent was.
Okay, well, let me give that a further look.
Okay.
I can do that.
Thank you. Other board members have questions? I'm not seeing any. Okay, so
sorry,
Vice Chair, like myself.
Very quickly, Chair. So yes, thank you, Director Lee, and Investigator Thomas for that. Obviously, whenever we can, I think the board needs to know whatever matter proceeding is causing this tolling to commence, especially in the case of when we have a deceased party. So whenever we can get clarification on that, in whatever format it needs to take, I really appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you for all these questions and comments. Do we have another? No, I'm not seeing or hearing any. Okay, so moving on. The Director Lee, do you have anything else to?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Did you remind folks that we'll be at the Juneteenth festival?
Oh, thank you. I think I wrote that in the agenda, actually, to remind myself. Okay, so we have, of course, I don't have that folder with me, but we have 3 people, and Ms. Saganor signed up, and Ms. Calavita, Board Member Calavita has the first shift, and then Board Member Moore, I think you signed up for the first shift being 11 to 1, and then Board Member Moore, no, 1 to 3. And then you might have been on the road already. Chair Chang, I asked if you could do 3 to 5, but I don't think I ever heard back about that.
Yeah, I think 3 to 5 works, and I might just drop in at the start of it to help everybody set up. I know there's a lot of setup.
Okay, all right. So I wanted to let, and so anybody else who could help out for an hour, you know, just so that people aren't stranded there by themselves for the whole 2 hours. Well, Ms. Saganor, I think, will be there in the beginning because she volunteered to bring a folding table and chairs. So I will have prepared, and I'll arrange this with you, Board Member Calavita, brochures, a clipboard, pens, you know, cards where people can give us their information if they want agendas, if they're interested in being on committees. And I wanted to write up something about our subcommittees as well. And then I'm also having we used to have a banner, the PRC had a banner, and I thought that the most expedient and budgetarily sound thing to do for the moment is to order a poster board that we have an easel for, with that says Police Accountability Board, has the City of Berkeley logo. So that is what I have planned, and maybe some candy or something, because that's something to get people to come by your table. So
You can add me. I changed some plans and can donate some time.
okay, great. Thank you very much. Do you know around when, or if you don't know, just shoot me an email.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Oh,
Great.
the other thing, I'm sorry, I'm looking at
The regulations.
my own agenda. I'm supposed to talk. I'm having a hard time getting everybody together for a special meeting for regulations, although I went up to June 24th, and there's really no day that even 7 of you can make it. And of course, all of you is ideal for regulations. So some alternate ideas are to look at later dates. One idea is we have an extra Wednesday in June. So the 29th might be a possibility, or doing it on the 22nd. In other words, not doing it during a regular meeting instead of a special meeting. So any thoughts? Okay, Board Member Lethbridge.
I didn't have a thought so much about the date, but I just wanted to say that the subcommittee, we had highlighted certain issues that we definitely wanted input from the board members on, but I don't want people to take that as some exclusive, you know, we want to hear from the board members about any thoughts they have, any questions. These were just ones that were particularly thorny for us, but you know, the board's ultimately going to be voting on this. And so please feel free to bring any questions. Better yet, if you could email them to Kathy, so if you have a question, she could circulate it in advance so that everybody has a chance to think about it. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Board Member Calavita.
Yes, I'm feeling a little bit of a sense of urgency with this. And I feel like the subcommittee, we met many, many times, and the issues that we were asking for the full board to consider are big issues. And partly we were asking the full board to consider because we were having trouble amongst ourselves getting consensus. I might propose that we have another subcommittee meeting to hear in particular from Lieutenant Montgomery, because we didn't finish hearing from him. And we had sort of punted that to the full board meeting on this. And I think it could be useful to hear from him in a committee meeting, during which we might also try to get a little bit more closure on one or two of these big issues in the interest of efficiency, since we can't seem to get the full board together. And because there was, I mean, I think it was board member Owens who actually thought we needed another subcommittee meeting. And I think given the givens, it wouldn't be a bad idea at this point to see if we can get this group of subcommittee members together with Lieutenant Montgomery. And we might get a head start on some of these things.
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea. You know, initially we decided not to do that. We thought Lieutenant Montgomery will review it, and he did like a pre-review kind of thing with us during the regs. So that is a thought. I want to make sure to hear from board member Owens, who had suggested that.
So my question or comment is related to hearing back from the city attorney's office, because a lot of the kind of roadblocks that we ran into in our regulations were related to whether or not, you know, the charter allowed it, or just some questions of clarification from the city attorney's office. So we can't, I feel like there's some things that we can't do anything with until we get that information. So I just kind of wanted to find out what's the status of that. Even if we meet as a subcommittee again, I think it's a good idea, but whether we do it at the full board level or the subcommittee, I think we need to have that information in front of us before we can move forward with finalizing those regulations.
I have not sent anything to the, I guess we have a cart and a horse issue. I have not sent anything to the city attorney's office yet, because some of it was dependent on what the board decided to do. In other words, some of the questions may be moot if you go one way or the other.
I think there was, I was under the impression that some of the questions were 100% we need a response back from the city attorney's office. There are some questions that
I think you're right. And my idea was to save them all up, but you know, I guess I could ask the ones that we're sure about, like subpoenas is one that comes to mind, that I think we're gonna, no matter where you fall, I think we're going to have that question answered.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe at a minimum forward the subpoena question that gives some movement. But then we'll also do the meeting in the regs, a final kind of meeting to discuss with Lieutenant Montgomery. There, of course, there's a lot of complex layers and issues here. And the point is to further fine tune. We have met many, many times. So we are fairly fine-tuned, but there are some kind of issues that we're still kind of ironing out. And then we can hear from Lieutenant Montgomery in a regulations meeting, and then go back into a special meeting with a little bit more conversation with Lieutenant Montgomery, and Lieutenant Montgomery would come back to the special meeting as well. So I know there's a timing issue. So in the end, we may have to put it inside a regular meeting, although the preference would be to have a special meeting.
Would it be possible to start our regular meeting earlier than usual?
Sure, that's a possibility.
And do we always have to have the same agenda items? I mean, can we truncate the agenda so that we get to the regulations agenda item quicker and not go through subcommittee reports and, other reports?
We think directly. I mean, subcommittee reports tend to be a reporting out as an update.
It's up to you.
Okay, we could do that. Could we do?
All.
Oh, you all. Yeah, not just me. So why don't we do that? Why don't we do a stream, because we're having trouble getting a special meeting. So number one, first, a regulations meeting and check in with Lieutenant Montgomery. We're not going to be able to finish everything in that one meeting, but we'll have a little bit more kind of that precatory overview. And then they'll give us some prep to go into the regular meeting, and we'll start a bit earlier. Instead of 7, maybe like 5, if everybody can
That's
do that,
doable for people.
if it's doable for folks. And then we'll have a streamlined agenda. You know, we'll have like roll call, approval agenda, public comment, approval of minutes. Do we need chair and board members reports? We could get rid of that, right? We'll get rid of director of POB, even the chief's report, and subcommittee reports. We might.
If there's
jump
something
down.
important, perhaps people could send their reports to Kathy, who could circulate them in advance, rather than us taking the time during the meeting.
That's
All
a
of that can be
possibility.
figured out later, right?
Yeah, so we will potentially cut down by nearly half the agenda for a public meeting that's zeroed in on the regulations.
For a regular meeting, you mean?
In a regular meeting, and then starting earlier at like 5 o'clock, if folks can do it. Do we need to do a motion of some sort?
No, because you, as the chair, can set the agenda, and I was suggesting that, you get some consensus from the group before you decide what you're going to do.
Sure, that makes sense.
That's
Yeah.
within your authority as chair.
So how about within my authority as chair at the next meeting?
22nd.
22nd. Can folks check really quickly? And is it, looking at the time, it's 7:54 right now. Time check. But the 22nd, can we meet as early as 5 o'clock?
Chair, that is the day that interviews with the director
Oh, right.
go all day. I don't
Right.
know what time they intend to finish, but
5.
5 o'clock.
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult.
we can start at 6,
Yeah,
the meeting.
Okay, how about 6 o'clock? Does that cause difficulty for anybody's schedule? I know people have families and stuff, and also they're like eating dinner, but 6 o'clock works for me that day, but I want to make sure that other folks are okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's an hour earlier.
I will say that if we're actually going from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., that is far from ideal for the members who are going to be in the interview panels.
That's right.
I know we don't have a better solution right now, so I'm not saying not to do it that day, but
yeah,
I don't realistically know how engaged we will be after
8 hours
of interviews, and then have a meeting on regulations. But that just may be something we can avoid right now.
Well, that's a good point, Vice Chair Mizell. I think you guys might, for those who are sitting on there, including members of the public too, they could be quite tired out if.
And I'm going to abstain because I don't want to speak for Ramsey, since I'm
Sure.
filling in for him. So I'll abstain from this vote.
Okay. Now, what if we pivoted to the meeting after the 22nd? When's that next one?
Wednesday. Okay. Are you talking about that extra Wednesday, the 29th? Because then your next regular meeting is July 13th.
Can we get the calendar worked out offline? So we have so much to do.
Yeah, let's do that offline. So it looks like the 13th, just so that folks know. Okay, we'll do it offline, and we're targeting the 13th instead of the 29th because of that hiring panel. Okay, great. And we are at the Chief of Police's report. Director Lee, have we covered everything?
Yes, I'm done.
Okay, great, thank you. And also thank you for rearranging your retirement schedule too. I know that's, extending your time out, it's much appreciated. It'll be beneficial for sure. And now on for the Chief of Police's report.
Hey, good evening. Thanks for having me. Chief Lewis couldn't be here tonight, but she did want me to forward on a couple of cases of interest. The first one being that on May 13th at about 2 in the afternoon, officers responded to the area of Alcatraz in California to a reported gunfire. When we arrived, we found evidence of gunfire, as well as a silver sedan that was left behind, apparently after it had collided with another vehicle that was parked. From surveillance footage in the area, detectives learned that the vehicle was abandoned, was one of 2 vehicles driving on Alcatraz, where a passenger was seen firing a handgun at the other vehicle. After additional investigation, officers identified the suspect responsible for the shooting as a 25-year-old Oakland man. He obtained a warrant for his arrest. Then on the 31st, the suspect was arrested in Oakland. At the time of arrest, he was armed with a handgun, and shortly thereafter, our detectives searched the suspect's residence and located an additional handgun. The other item that I know is of interest to you all, the chief understands that the board has questions about after hearing the news of our recent arrests related to the threats of terror attack at VHS. I am able to share some limited information regarding this arrest. First, the department does not have any evidence or information to suggest that there remains a threat to Berkeley High School. Because the community came forward with vital information, officers were able to intervene, contacting the student, the suspect and his family, obtaining a search warrant to seize potentially dangerous items, and arranging for our mobile crisis team to evaluate the suspect. We knew that at this point, the potentially dangerous items seized was not a complete picture, and that further investigation was needed. In the following days, detectives worked to put the individual bits of information of the case together, and before a judge would approve the arrest warrant. During that time, the department was in communication with the suspect's guardian or attorney and DHS to ensure that we knew he was not going to be on campus, which was the target of his threats. When the investigation reached a point where we could obtain a warrant, the department made arrangements for the suspect's arrest. The suspect is currently in custody, and these items have been seized. We know that learning that a student was potentially planning a horrific act of violence in our community is obviously shocking. In many of the past mass shootings or acts of violent incidents across our nation, the violence has already occurred, and we're better able to see a complete picture. Fortunately, that wasn't the case in this incident, and there was no violence. School safety remains a high priority for the department. While there are things we're not able to share because of the active investigation, we hope this additional information answers some of the questions that you might have. After the arrest occurred, we communicated with the community about the incident. Our SRO maintained a presence on campus for the remainder of the school year, and our department did support the VHS graduation events. Members of our department from the Community Service Bureau and our PIO did participate in a town hall meeting with several council members related to this event. And then lastly, she wanted me to share that our current sworn staffing strength remains at 152, though we hope to send 5 entry-level officers to the academy that starts July 5th. Recruitment and retention remain a challenge to maintaining our current staffing goals. And that was all that I have.
Thank you. So we did have that 7B, and we'll make the questions quick. We also want to allow board members to ask some questions to the extent that you have answers to them. I want to start off by saying thank you for joining us, Lieutenant Rittenhouse, and also thank you for the efforts of the police department in ensuring, in the case of the unfortunate situation with the student with the apparent plans for a mass shooting, for the police work that was done there. It is something that in the community, of course, has generated a lot of high concern, particularly in the days after the Uvalde incident. As you've covered a bit, there's a kind of a structure in place between the BPD and the USD. There's a SRO and there's SSOs on campus, school security officers, as well as school resource officer. School resource officer is a police officer, and he's been, I've heard a lot of high praise for him over the years. I think his name is Officer Mitchell. And with regard to his engagement with students, et cetera. And in this case, some of the questions that emerge are, what were some of the interactions in terms of the process for like a threat assessment protocol? It sounds like it came in through a tip, is my understanding. I would just kind of want to know very briefly, if you're aware, like if there's some kind of standard protocol when you get a tip of a potential mass shooter in a school, what are some of the communications protocols that are set up with regard to threat assessment with BUSD personnel, such as the SRO and or the SSOs and otherwise on campus?
Sure. All the situations are different. How and where and when we receive information can really vary. It also, part of the process that drives this is verifying the tip. Are they credible? Is it credible information? And I'm not speaking to this particular latest event, but as we receive information, we work quickly and diligently to verify. Oftentimes that means just trying to identify who the individual who is alleged to make the crime or to alleged to have made the threats is, and then working through that process. So that process, as you know, depending upon when it comes in, we loop in our SRO. Oftentimes detectives or patrol officers work hard at running down tips or gathering more information, and then addressing as best we can and how we can eliminate either the event from occurring or addressing it on campus if it's an immediate situation. But we work with school staff, we work with school administrators, we work with our detectives. But each case varies so greatly based on the information that we have.
Sure. So is one of the immediate points of contact the SRO or the superintendent in emergency circumstances?
So we generally, depending upon how quickly things are unfolding, tend to loop them in because they're great sources of information. They can add context. They are on campus. Our SRO knows so many of these kids on a personal level. He really is a valuable resource in just making good decisions throughout our process here. So yeah, we tend to loop them in on incidents involved in the high school.
Thank you. And I would assume you might not know exactly, but that looping in would be tied into a threat assessment kind of protocol that the district might have through an MOU with the police department, or is it something that's separate without an MOU? Is that a document that engages with the BPD?
Yeah, I just don't know. I can't speak to the school's threat assessment protocols.
Okay.
But I imagine they would loop in the SRO when they hear information as well.
Thank you. And one last question. There's been some news coverage about a concern about the passage of time between the arrest warrant and the actual arrest. I would assume that there's some confidentiality issues involved there. Is there any news that the BPD can provide for why it apparently took 9 days to arrest a suspect?
I don't have any more. I can tell you that throughout that whole time, it was thoughtfully and diligently worked on as we worked through the investigation. But I don't have anything other than what we've already released in that regard.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions from other folks? Okay, there doesn't appear to be other questions on that issue and for the chief of police reportage. Thank you very much for speaking with us. Great. Moving on to subcommittee reports. Fair and impartial policing implementation.
The subcommittee met this afternoon, and we've been working on the three-pronged BPD approach to traffic enforcement. And June 14th, the chief is scheduled to report to council on the implementation of the fair and impartial policing recommendations, not recommendations, directives from council. And that's all I have.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take a break now, and Vice Chair Mizell is going to take over and act for a while.
Chair, we're going to really skip B and fold that into 8B is going to be folded into 10A.
Okay. So moving on to C.
And that's folded into 10B.
Control equipment also. Okay, that's right. With old business, considering forming outreach committee, board member Calavita.
Yes, that's left over from previous agendas. I don't think that there's anything much more to report. I do have several ideas, one of which is that the first thing the outreach committee, I think, needs to do, and that PAB needs to do in general, is to get a good photograph of us all as a group. One of the problems with the director's search and the recruitment brochure was that there were no photographs of the PAB or PRC to put. And if we're going to do outreach, we're going to need such a photograph.
So we'd like to try to meet at some point and do an outdoor photograph, maybe right on the steps of City Hall or somewhere like that.
Yes, and we don't need to figure that out now, but it's just something that's been on my mind.
Okay, so let's put that as a flag to try to get everybody, as many people together to take that picture, which would be nice regardless, maybe once a year, do photos of that sort. And how about B, consider forming a subcommittee, Lexipol policies also.
Oh, okay,
I
excuse
think
me.
that was done. That was done last time.
Oh, that's right. We did that last time.
No, I don't think we did.
Oh, we didn't form yet?
I thought we got board member Ramsey and Leftwich on board there.
I think they talked about their interests, but we did not actually, you did not actually form one. It's not on the list. So unless I fell down on the job, well, it should be in the minutes.
Yeah, I don't think we officially did it either. We talked about it. I said I would be interested as soon as the regulations work is done.
Okay. Director Lee, were you going to comment on that agenda item?
Yes, I was going to say if you did it, it would have been in the minutes, and it was postponed. Both were postponed. Actually, what I wanted to say was, Board Member Calavita, do you want to try to form an outreach subcommittee now, or you just want to plant the idea in people's head? Because I think people are still pretty overworked right now.
Yes, let's wait until we can get through the
regulation
stuff.
Okay, that sounds good. But we have two volunteers who had said that afterwards they would be interested. Okay. I thought we had 3 though. Was it 2 or 3?
What?
Potential volunteers for the Lexipol policy.
I don't remember.
Okay, we can look in the minutes, but if you remember being the third person aside from, I think it's board member Ramsey and board members Leftwich, then please do re-engage with Director Lee. New business. Approve possible communications to city manager regarding the PAB's role in selecting the permanent director of police accountability. So I'm going to take a break now, and Vice Chair Mizell will take over.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, if I go to Board Member Levine, if you would like to start off with a report now. You're muted.
Sorry. It's a little bit of conundrum. There are a lot of unanswered questions. Some questions have been answered. I did speak with LaTanya Bello, and this is my report, really. On last Friday was June 3rd, and got several answers, some of which were outlined by Rivka Polotnik, who's one of the public members in our group, in her statement at the beginning. There's going to be interviews from 8 until 5. Really, the first hour will be introductory by the buyers group from 9 until 5. 3 panels will interview a certain number of candidates. The number I don't know, she didn't know at this point. The reason that question is important is because the mayor and city council are supposed to essentially evaluate the top candidates according to the contract we have that will then be interviewed by these panels. So this panel process is an important one for us to have participation in a significant, meaningful way. It's clear, according to Ms. Bello, that 3 of us of our choosing, can be subcommittee, can be other members of the PAB, will be on one panel. In addition, there'll be a couple of oversight body participants from other jurisdictions. And then questions will be asked, but they're going to be developed by the buyers group. The questions won't be asked by the participants in the panel. They'll be asked by somebody else on behalf of this creation by the buyers group. I was concerned about that, and so I said, well, how can I really evaluate anything if I can't ask a question? Well, you can ask follow-up questions. So that somewhat satisfied me, because anything can be a follow-up. But what information do we have going in? Well, we don't have the report that has been created, and presumably, but not, I don't know for sure, was given to the mayor and the city council so that they could have a closed session meeting with buyers to winnow down the candidates. I don't know if that's happened either. The problem with just posing questions is I get answers from the deputy city manager, but really what I want is I want to make sure that the answers will provide us with the opportunity to learn things about the candidates in a meaningful way, and then be able to make recommendations that we think will be useful in making the final selection by the city council. So what I am proposing here and ask the board to support is a letter that includes both some of these questions, but connects the questions to why the answers are important. For example, we need information in advance of these panels about each candidate: resume, reference letters, interview notes, whatever's been created. I asked for the reports, this report that buyers created, and was said we can't get that. So what is it we're going to get, and when are we going to get it? Well, she answered that question too. You'll get it at 8 a.m. The summary. It looks like it's a summary of the report, which is a summary of the candidates' interview notes, etc. I think we need more than simply a summary, and I'd like to craft a letter from the board, not me, but from Mr. Mizell, because he's the chair, acting chair in this regard, that essentially outlines why it's important for us to get information in advance. For example, 24 hours in advance. That's not really asking for a lot. We'd have the day before where we could read about the candidates and formulate some idea of the direction we'd like to go. Hopefully the buyers group will be in sync with us. If they're not, we can ask follow-up questions. So I'm throwing this out here to get support from the board. This is an important step in the process for this person who we're going to work closely with in the very near future. And I don't really have a clue as to who these people are. And we need to know that so that these panel interviews allow us to gather the information we need to make recommendations to the city council and to the mayor for the final selection, which will be by the city council. It's true that only 3 people will be identified by the city manager from this whole process, but clearly the intent and of the charter and of the contract that they entered into with buyers, the city, has the PAB, as Ms. Palatnik mentioned. The PAB participates in the panels, the subcommittee of the PAB. So that means we're important. That means our voice needs to be heard. We need to be informed in order to make our voice meaningful. So how do you guys feel about this? I'd like to get some support. I can make a motion, or someone else can. Questions? Vice Chairman.
Member Lethwich.
I completely support Board Member Levine's suggestion and the concept about writing a letter with specific requests. I think it's important.
Member Keller.
I also support this wholeheartedly. It's really concerning that we don't know how these panels will be constituted, including the PAB panel. We really need, or the panel really needs, more information more ahead of time. And I'm also curious as to what impact these interview panels will have. So we go through the work, not we, but the panelists, for 8 hours or however long it is. And what I assume fill out a grading chart or something, ranking people. And we're not sure what impact that has, you know. It's all very vague, and I feel like we need more specificity, and the contract gives an important role to the PAB, and I don't really see that happening yet.
Board Member Owens.
Can somebody clarify when you say the contract gives this role to the PAB? What contract are you referring to?
It's the contract that the city entered into to hire the buyers group. That, you know, they're paid to do this work, and these are part of the public record. Whenever the city contracts with a outside agency to do work, this is essentially hiring for the purpose of hiring the new director. They don't do the hiring, they do the groundwork. And so there's a contract that outlines what the goals are, what the requirements are, and they have to be read to be consistent with the charter as well. The charter is very absent, as I mentioned at the last meeting, specificity about the hiring process. The contract goes into more detail.
So what does the contract say the role of the PAB is?
Well, specifically at this stage, which is what we're concerned about, it says in the timeline that the top candidates participate in interviews. I'm reading directly from the Exhibit A of the contract, which outlines the tasks. Top candidates participate in interviews with mayor and city council and PAB subcommittee final candidate selection for salary negotiation, and final, I should put my glasses on, referencing. So we're at this stage now, the panels, where we participate in the interviews. But it doesn't say, do we deliberate? Do we individually fill out a score sheet as Board Member Calavita hypothesized? I think there's got to be some deliberative process to really get to a meaningful recommendation, which then we need to make. Because being in the panel, but then going home and coming to the meeting at 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whatever, and not knowing if what happened during those 8 hours will have any impact on the selection isn't, that's not going to be okay. We're clearly important. It's axiomatic when you have a director who needs to work with a body, the administrator of the body, us, the board, needs to be compatible, needs to have the same vision, needs to have similar goals. They have different roles, but they have to work together. And so, we were heard on these questions at the very beginning. The buyers group came in and said, what are you looking for? And we gave the answer to what I'm outlining here. So now we're going to find that person or group of people who have those qualities. So if we agree, but after deliberation in various panels, gee, number 1, 2, and 3 are really super duper, let's, well, what about this? What about 5? Well, you're right. What about 5? Well, isn't that how we're going to come up with the best recommendation? And then it has to be heard. So we have to be able to either make a written report, meet with the city council to give a verbal report. These things are not stated specifically, and I think we need to know so that we know that we're not just going to go home and be thanked, but really be heard.
Is this just another conversation with Latanya Bello?
Pardon me?
Is this just another conversation that needs to happen?
I don't think so. See, she's been very responsive to the questions. The problem is it's not just simply 1 or 2 questions. It's really a statement of how are we going to get to this goal of having meaningful input. We need the reports. We need the resumes, the interview notes. What combination can you give us and when? 8 o'clock in the morning is too early. It's too late. It's maybe too early, but it's also too late in terms of preparation. So I don't think questions alone will do it, because I've gone through this with her several times, and a lot of times she doesn't have the answer. So I think it's time for us to affirmatively assert what we need in order to reach our goals. But I agree, Member Owens, we need to ask more questions too, but it gets to be lost in the questions sometimes, what we really want. And that's what I want a letter that sort of combines both.
Part of me, I'm going back and forth in my mind about how I feel about this letter, because the charter gives us no authority when it comes to hiring a director, like 0. So anything that the city does to include us in the process, I think is bonus, honestly, because there's nothing in the charter that says we have to be included. So, and it sounds like you are having conversation with Latanya Bello, and I just think sometimes things are better communicated you know, in person, either by phone or whatever, versus in a letter. It's just my own personal feeling.
Well, you know, the thing is that I'm just one person. And so I think if I'm correct that the board feels this is a critical stage of this process, and what I'm suggesting we need to have meaningful input, and I disagree with you that the charter doesn't give us a role. I think it's because the charter gives us a role that we're written directly into this contract from the very beginning to the very end.
Can you and charter where it gives us a role? Because
yeah,
I don't see it anywhere in the charter.
It does in the well, I'll get to it. The section. It's not, you know, 1, 2, 3. It's not specific with regard to anybody. It's clear that it's not the city manager. It's clear that the selection ultimately is with the city council. But we're the advisory board to this. We're acting on behalf of the city council as a board and as a subcommittee. So we have to be able to inform them about our views.
Well, the charter says the city manager shall recommend 3 candidates for consideration by the city council.
Yeah, and
city council should appoint.
That's for sure. That's going to happen.
I don't see anything in here that says the PAB has anything to do with this process.
Well, let me ask hypothetically, if we don't, why is it written into the contract that we must be a part of the recruitment process and creating the brochure, which we edited, except that it was changed at the end with the photographs, which we were concerned about. But nevertheless, then we went on to the stage that we're at now, where it's written specifically into this contract that we will be a part of the panels. Why is that? Why are we part of the panels if our input isn't important? It's clearly important, and it's implied. Why is the mayor and the city council given the top candidates to winnow down before the city manager selects 3 candidates? It's implied that this is a broad spectrum search process, and that the board itself is one of the prongs of that process. I don't think there's any question about that, because otherwise it wouldn't be enumerated in this agreement that the city entered into with the buyers group. I think we can do both, Board Member Owens. I think we can do both continued conversations and questions, but also I think it's important for the board to speak as a group, because I do think this is important.
Yes, I'm just going to add, Board Member Levine, I at this stage, I agree with you. I have I believe a positive relationship with Ms. Bello, and we've had numerous conversations in terms of city policy. But ultimately, this board needs clear answers in terms of what this process will be, how our input will be used or not used, why or what issues may there be in terms of providing this information. I think we need to have that in writing. Quite frankly, we are now very close to when this process will commence. And I don't think at this stage, informal conversation is the best service, at least to the board as a whole. A letter to me seems very appropriate. It's no need for it to be over the top, but of course, these are questions that need to be addressed. And, I understand that in the charter, our explicit role is not stated, and ultimately the city manager gets to make that decision, and they're going to be able to make that decision regardless of whatever role we have beforehand. So we should have, to my thinking, the fullest role before that decision gets made, and the fullest understanding of how our input will be used by the city manager. Those questions to me have not been answered clearly in writing in all these time. Yeah, I don't think that anything in terms of purposeful, of course not. I think it's truly just the process has continued on the buyers group end, process has continued on HR's end, and we still don't have a clear answer as to why things are a certain way past having Board Member Levine have one-on-one phone calls, one-on-one email conversations. Ultimately, I think as a board, we need to get those answers as a whole and very clearly in writing. I think Board Member Calavita.
Sorry, I didn't lower my hand.
All right, Director Lee.
Thank you. I am going to suggest that the PAB role was written into the contract because the city manager and the mayor and the council understood that, notwithstanding the lack of any formal role for this board in the selection of the director, that they wanted to have the PAB. They wanted to give the PAB a role, and that's what they did. And it seemed to me that Board Member Levine, you kind of answered your own question by saying that, well, if we're in here, then we must be important. And I think I agree with that. And so I don't think you're participating on a panel only to have your input ignored. And, you know, maybe I just have this perspective because either because I'm a city staffer and I, you know, give my colleagues too much weight, but I sincerely believe that the board's input, evaluation of the candidates will be given serious consideration.
And I actually very much appreciate that, and I think that is a good first paragraph to this letter that I'm proposing, because I think once we're there in these panels, it's going to be difficult to make any changes. But if we know in advance exactly how it's going to work, it will enable us to maybe more comfortably feel that what you're saying is true. So now that means more questions, and that's why I guess I'm envisioning a letter that politely, cordially poses questions with, you know, stated goals. And one of the questions really has to do with getting meaningful information in advance. So
if I could just say one more thing, I
Yes,
know
sure.
Board Member Lefwich has her hand raised, but when I was on the panel for the Sonoma County director of their oversight agency, I didn't get anything, and I did this 3 times. They used a recruiting firm. You don't get anything till you walk in the door. You sit down with the coffee and the pastries they provide you, and you go through the binder and you read. And then you get an introduction from the recruiter about how the interviews are going to go. They have there are set questions. You decide who's going to ask which questions. You usually just go around the room. And then there is a grading system that they use. And at the end, you talk about all the candidates and who's your number one. You know, you go around the room, what order do you rank them as? And then at the end, so I was on a panel with other oversight people plus staff, like, you know, management level, like the deputy sheriff and assistant county counsel. And then there were 2 panels. The other panel was community members. And then we got together at the end, the 2 panels got together at the end and discussed who we liked and didn't like. And actually, it turned out we were pretty close. So,
You mean
terms
in
of our
close
preference- in
to
terms of-
agreement?
yeah.
Well, see, that's very helpful, but I'd like to hear that that's what's happening. And yeah, so, because many of the questions I asked, she didn't have the answer to. So yeah, okay.
Board Member Lethbridge.
Just going to suggest that Board Member Levine make a motion. We've got a lot to do tonight.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and I will. I'd like to make. I will make a motion to have the board, through the vice chair, send a letter to the relevant parties, which could include the city manager, the deputy city manager, mayor, and council, to get some clarification about these questions and why we think it's important to get the information answered in advance and state why.
I second the motion.
Who is being authorized to draft this letter?
Board Member Levine, I assume it's you.
Well, I'm, it's fine, but I'm not going to do it without participation of others. So I will circulate it. But I think that
you can't circulate it to a majority, so you have to pick.
Can't we authorize the subcommittee to draft the letter?
Yeah,
we can do that. No, I oppose that.
Okay. Okay, are you ready to vote? Does everybody?
Board Member Lethbridge, is that a new hand or?
No, old hand.
Sorry.
Okay, on the motion, Board Member Calavita,
Yes.
Chang. Oh, sorry, he's recused from this conversation. Harris,
Yes.
Lethwich,
Yes.
Levine,
Yes.
Mizell,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Owens,
No.
Batista.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much, Vice Chair Mizell, for acting in my absence and recusal. So we are on to the Controlled Equipment Subcommittee report.
Yes, Chair, we are. And let me just try to get the documents in front of me here. So as the board will recall, back at the May 11th meeting, we formed the subcommittee to further dive into what was, I guess, council's item on the controlled equipment impact statements, the applicable use policies, and the use report, which we frankly did not fully have time to address, but we will get to those details. We had 3 meetings of the subcommittee where we met with, I believe at 2 of them with Captain Roleri at the department, along with, if you can help me here, Miss Lee, was it Sergeant
Lee? Was
Sergeant
it Sergeant Lee?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it was Sergeant Lee, yes. So at those meetings, we discussed in greater detail some of the applicable issues that could arise from the impact statements, what the board's role is in addressing those issues. And ultimately, and in short, though I strongly recommend, if you haven't already, I'm looking over Director Lee's memo, which is very helpful in this regard. Ultimately, we came to a few recommendations, but with, I think that the really strong caveat that we did not, as least as the subcommittee, and I do not believe as a board, have really the proper time or capacity to truly meet all of the requirements of the ordinance in terms of our responsibilities in reviewing their impacts. I would state for the record, there's a number of reasons why, but one of which is the very confusing timeline, which is still, I believe to this minute, still unclear as to exactly when we would legally have to bring this forward. But as we know, so far as we know now, it needs to go to council by, I believe that June 14th date. Now, again, the issues that rise from there go into the earlier notice of violation that I sent to the city. I only bring it up in its direct regards to its effect on the timeline. Perhaps we'll get an answer from the city attorney's office tonight, but up until this meeting, I've heard nothing about any response to those violations, which included factors that would have affected the timeline of our review. Referring back to the recommendations we did make out of the subcommittee, our first recommendation was that this board rejects the impact statements based on the department's descriptions of the impact, which is category 4 on, let me get the page for you. Either page 3 of the ordinance, which is 2.100.20 in the definition section. If you look at the impact sections, most specifically of the M4 rifle, you can see that so I don't have the text in front of me, but it refers to the M4 as inanimate object and does not really dive into the impacts as defined in the ordinance, which are a quote, an assessment specifically identifying any possible impacts that the use of controlled equipment might have on the welfare, safety, civil rights, and civil liberties of the public. I do not believe the department did that on several of the items within the impact statements. And the reason that is important for us as a board, specifically important for us as a board, is that the criteria that is required of us in making the determination, so this is 2.100.40 C1, the PAB shall recommend approval of a request to fund, acquire, or use controlled equipment only if it determines all the following. The equipment is needed and there's no practical available alternative, number 1, number 2, or B, excuse me. The proposed equipment will safeguard the public's welfare, safety, civil rights, and civil liberties. And C, the controlled equipment will not be used based on race, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, political viewpoint, or disability, or, and to me, this is a really critical or, disproportionately impact any community or group. There was simply no way for us as at least a subcommittee, and I believe as a board, to have made that determinations on the time we had to review this. In our discussions with the department, they mentioned how they had subject matter experts and armory experts come in and write the sections in terms of the weapons and their capacities and their abilities. But we never heard from that expert ourselves or from any outside expert for that matter. So we would be strictly taking the word of the lieutenant of the department, who was not even the expert who wrote some of those sections. So I think that's a major issue we have to consider as a board in terms of recommendation. Moving on to our second prong was that we recommended that the impact statements pertaining to chemical agents and kinetic impact projectiles ensure that they fully delineate and fully account for the restrictions imposed by AB 48. I will mention the department has put in AB 48 language in some of the applicable policies, but it's not clear in some of the impact statements and hasn't been fully updated in our opinion. And that's an issue that should be looked at. Number 3, if I have it, where did it go? I'm missing the recommendation here, Ms. Lee. Where would you go? What am I forgetting right now? There's a recommendation before a final one, I believe. I don't know. I'm sorry, Board Member Moore, can you help me? I thought we made 4 recommendations, or am I?
I believe it was just 3 recs.
It was just 3?
I believe
Okay,
so.
maybe that's the lack of 3. My bad. Okay, it was 3 recommendations. The last one being our recommendation that the PAB, the department, the city attorney's office, discuss the discrepancies in between the ordinance, AB 481, the state law, and figure out how to improve and hopefully streamline this process in the future. Some of the issues that have arisen, I truly believe were completely, it's unintentional and different interference between the state law, the city ordinance, and the lack of clarity, which still exists at this moment. But that is, I believe, a summary that I can give you from our recommendations. The last, I guess, 2 small things I will mention, well, not small, but important things I will mention are, we did not really have any time to address the annual use report, and that's something we as a board will have to decide to schedule at some other time. Based on the timelines we know now, that could be due, I believe, as early as, but that'd be due by June 25th, which quite frankly is pretty soon. So that's a conversation we can have as well. And then number 2, lastly, AB 41 creates its own process in terms of the military equipment policy, which essentially policy 709 would be a packet of those use policies for the controlled equipment as defined by AB 481. That's a separate process that this board should also likely take on. And I believe in theory, we should have quite a bit more time to do that than we have for this process. But that's a slightly separate conversation. But hopefully I have not confused anyone more, but that's really, I believe, a summary of what came out of the subcommittee.
We have a question from Board Member Calavita. Thank you, Vice Chair Mizell. That was not more confusing. That helped clarify. I know it's a complicated issue.
I'd like to ask Board Member Mizell, what are the, because I think there are 2 ways to go. One is to reject the impact statement. And the other is to recommend modification, because we can accept, modify, or reject. And I think clearly we have to choose between reject and modify. But I want to know what the consequence of rejecting is, because I believe the consequence at this stage of the game would be that the department would not be allowed to use any of this equipment. So I totally agree with you and the committee that the sections on impact and use are both incomplete and inaccurate, really, and that they need to be modified. Am I correct in saying that if we reject this out of hand, that would have the consequence that none of this equipment can be used?
Can I answer that?
Yes.
You're recommending to the council that it reject. So it's the council's ultimate decision. If they reject, then it would result in.
If the council were, I mean, it would be irresponsible for us to recommend something that we hope they don't do. So if they were to take our recommendation and reject it, what would be the consequence of that?
Reject the impact statements or reject the recommendation?
The impact, if we were to recommend that they reject the statement,
Right.
does that then mean that the department is not allowed to use any of this equipment?
If the council adopts your recommendation to reject them, yes, I believe that it means they can't use it.
Would it be preferable to recommend modification with a timeline attached to it, say 60 days or 90 days, that the statement needs to be adjusted to comply with the ordinance? The ordinance makes it very clear that the impact part of it has to include potential negative impacts. I mean, otherwise the category of modifications makes no sense, because modifications are defined in the ordinance as specific affirmative technical and procedural measures that will be implemented to safeguard the public from such impacts. Well, if there's no negative impacts even mentioned, potential negative impacts, then it makes no sense to have a category of mitigations. So clearly that, and the use section reads like a product insert. You know, you buy a product and it tells you what it's to be used for and how great it is. But the use section in this impact statement needs at least to make reference to the existing policies, such as in the city of Berkeley, tear gas is banned. Doesn't take much to say that. And in addition, reference the various policies. And then, of course, it needs to be said that those policies need to be updated to be consistent with Berkeley policy and state law. But I think that, I want to ask the committee, what, is this not a way of having it both ways, making our statement that this is inadequate, but allowing the council to require modifications within a certain timeline?
I wouldn't be opposed to modification if, for one, I would not want to write specific language. Quite frankly, I believe that was the responsibility of the department. And again, I don't want to misstate anything the department said, and Ms. Lee, correct me if I'm wrong, but from our conversation with the captain, it did not seem like they were willing to change any of the language, at least at this stage. Maybe at the council stage they will, but nothing we suggested they wanted to change, which I think is striking, frankly. But yeah, so I wouldn't be opposed to that. I think it's just how we would phrase that. I would want it to be a general statement about the problem with the impacts, problem with the use section, and how the department should address these issues within a certain timeline. I don't think we should try to write specific policy tonight, because I think the argument will be, we don't have the knowledge or expertise to make those arguments about what all those impacts are. Now, some of them I'm surely we could make, but quite frankly, I don't think, the board hasn't heard from any independent experts about this equipment. We haven't even heard from the department's expert on this equipment. We were never able to ask questions of any expert on this equipment. And I'll just speak for myself. I don't feel comfortable saying I could recommend, and I'm not saying you're implying this, Board Member Kevin, but I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that right now. But if it's a general, this needs to be modified in this way within a certain timeline, I could be definitely amenable to that. And I'm not sure, Board Member Moore, if you have an opinion as well.
I would be, I'm sorry, not to interrupt. I see everyone's hands up, but I would be a little hesitant and reticent to give the modification excuse me, to recommend modification, only because there are so many loose ends that we haven't really been able to get everybody on the same page. And when I say everybody, I mean Berkeley Police, I mean the mayor's office, city council, the city attorneys. This process and what we're trying to do is all hands on deck. And I just don't think we've had the participation to get it over the line.
Yeah, and I would acknowledge Barbara Calavita that I don't think any of us naive to the fact that this would put the city council in a position they probably, it's just uncomfortable. I'll just say that. I mean, I think it's either rejects or, again, they can take out some other action. They have the power and ability to do that. But obviously I don't think they would outright reject just because of the implications of that. Obviously I'm not counsel, they'll make whatever decision they may. But at the same time, if the department is not willing to make any changes at this stage, I'm not sure. But I'm sure I'm amenable to that, especially if it's in a more general context that puts the onus of making the changes on the department. And again, I think my hope, I think our hope in the process was that they would make modification, we would come back with something, they would make modification, and then at some point we could say we disagree. But to me, that happened basically at the very beginning of the process. And very little, I believe, if anything, was changed from when we made those initial recommendations.
Thank you, Vice Chair Meisel. We have 4 comments, and including Lieutenant Rittenhouse, who may have some commentary on the police side on to support our conversation here. Shall we start with Board Member Calavita?
Well, I already had my say once, but I do think since I don't think that we need to provide specific language. I agree with that, we're not the subject matter experts. However, we do know that the impact sections and the use sections are inadequate given what the ordinance requires. We also know that there are some policies that are in the appendix and referred to here that are not up to date, either by Berkeley law or by state law, Berkeley policy or by state law. And therefore, I don't think we should be so specific as to write the language for them, but we can be specific enough that we can say it needs to be modified here, here, and here. And I think that it puts us in a very bad position, frankly, to just say reject outright, when we in fact know that these are the sections that need change.
And if I could briefly respond to that as well, speaking for myself, part of the reason I went with reject was because, the process has been flawed, in my opinion, from almost the start. And that process, how the process was supposed to go, did not happen. And instead, we had this process, which was truncated and unclear and created, to me, now the board had obviously many, many other tasks in front of it and still has many, many to go. But that process, lack of clarity on the timeline, the submission of items that was going with one state law, but doesn't follow the ordinance, and the fact that we still don't have any clarity from the city attorney, I felt it was more appropriate just to reject because it doesn't meet the requirements of the ordinance. We didn't have the proper time, and I have to make sure we list these reasons if we go that direction. And we couldn't make the determinations we were supposed to make. I don't disagree with modify in terms of, obviously there are things that do need to be modified, But that to me would have implied that we had the proper time to make the determinations, and that we've now decided after that we are recommending these modifications. So I think it's just a slight preference. I would say reject and focus on these areas. One could say modify and focus on these areas. But that was kind of my reasoning, or additional reasoning as to why.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Batista?
Yes,
Oh, no
hi.
problem.
So we live in a very polarized country with increasing amounts of political violence, as we saw in the insurrection. And what I am seeing is that there is a trend towards nonviolent de-escalation. I mean, if we can train poll workers to de-escalate on the ground, why can't Berkeley police do the same? You know, Berkeley is a very creative, cutting edge, and really leads on these issues. There are nonviolent means to break up a crowd that isn't using batons and canisters. So if I am correct in thinking a rejection is no to all of that and to creative de-escalation tactics, which is where we're going in our electoral world, I would favor that in Berkeley.
But that's not what this is about.
What is it about?
Warren Batista, I would say that in terms of AB 48, there are things you said there that are applicable, or that the board should consider in terms of recommendation, ensuring that not just the 428, the First Amendment assembly policy, but that the actual equipment policies comport with AB 48, which puts additional requirements in terms of the use of impact projectiles. So that materially relates, but yeah, the recommendations tonight are directly connected to what has come out of these impact statements.
Okay, then I'm going to vote to abstain, but if that, I mean, based on what I'm hearing about, yes, the use of that equipment, okay.
Okay. Thank you. Board Member Owens?
Is it possible we can get, since one of members of the city council or city attorney's office is present in this meeting, can we get some direction from the city attorney's office as to what is that deadline? Because I mean, I think that's also critical, because I think one of the things that I'm hearing from the subcommittee and Board Member Calavita, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, is, you know, there's a hesitancy to totally reject it because it may lead to their inability to use this equipment until it's approved. So I think that's why we're hesitant to reject. And also, you know, Board Member Mazel said that, you know, we haven't had time to review and get more information. So if we knew what the drop dead date was, I think that, at least for me, that would help. And then, so can we hear from the city attorney's office?
Yes, certainly, Board Member Owens, if you know, our office has previously provided guidance as reflected in Director Lee's staff memo that June 28th is the final deadline provided by the ordinance, after which, if the council has not approved the report, then the controlled equipment cannot be used.
So then,
So it does, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to, an issue with that is my notice of violation, which specifically delineates alleged violations of the ordinance. The city has not responded to that. Does the city attorney's office plan to respond to that notice at some point, if ever?
So I'm aware of the notice that you had sent. I understand that it was sent in your individual capacity, and you clarified that you've previously spoken with other members of the city attorney's office, and I'm not in position to speak further to that in a public meeting.
I don't believe I've spoken to, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't think I've spoken to any member of the city attorney's office on this issue specifically. And I don't know, it's very, I'll just tell you, it's very frustrating that nothing has been said from the city attorney in this regard. I understand I filed it in my individual capacity. The issue specifically deals with the timelines. If the city attorney found that there was a violation of that, then you would have to notice that violation on the website and a remedy of some kind. The lack of response has run out the clock on probably what would have been easier remedies. And if the city does not believe there are any violations, I would just ask that an email be sent my way that says that, and I would not have to continue to ask, because those timelines obviously affect the board, they affected the subcommittee, and it just happens to be because of how the ordinance was written that I filed in my individual capacity. But ultimately, the effects weren't about me as an individual at all. They were about the effects on the board, the subcommittee, and our timeline. And I respect if you can't comment on it in public right now. I don't believe any member of the city attorney's office has spoken with me at least in months on the issue. And I only believe I've gotten any update since I submitted that about 6 weeks ago.
Vice Chair Mizell, weren't you in a meeting with Ms. Mattis and I? And me?
Yeah. Do you remember when that meeting was, Ms. Lee?
No.
I feel like it was a while ago.
Maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago.
Feels longer to me.
Well, it was definitely after your notice, and the purpose of the meeting was to talk about the notice. It was on a Wednesday, that much I remember.
Okay, well, there was a short meeting where I got no information, very little information about what was happening, and nothing has changed since then. But
yes,
I will leave it at that.
Respectfully appreciate that it is a kind of complex issue, the timing. Our office has issued its interpretation that June 28th is the final date under the ordinance, and that's the information that I've been authorized to share tonight.
So I would like to say, I think I agree with what Board Member Calavita said, and correct me if I'm wrong, if this is not what she said, but I agree that we should provide some sort of recommendation, be it if we modify and we say, here's where we think that these documents fall short. Because that at least gives City Council some guidance versus just saying we reject it all and don't give them any guidance. I think because they're going to have to make some sort of decision, and it looks like the 14th is the date they're going to make some sort of decision. So I think it would be important that we say that, even if we say we reject it, here's the things that we think need to be cleaned up, at least to start. And I think we also should put in there, we haven't had the time to really delve into it as deeply as we'd like, but just based on the time period that we have, this is where we see issues. We're not saying that there may not be other issues, which the City Council may see, but we're just saying based on the time period that we've had and the meetings that we've had with the department, here's where we think this document falls short. Now, whether or not we put that in, that we want that document we want to modify that document, or we want to reject it outright, I think we still should provide guidance to the council where we see it fall short, so they can at least have something to work with.
Thank you, Board Member Owens. Lieutenant Rittenhouse.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that the chief really has impressed on me, her and the department's absolute willingness to work together with you all should the board choose to move forward with some sort of qualified approval. It's not that whatever decision you make tonight, I just wanted to impress that the department and the chief are willing to work together on this going forward.
Thank you. Board Member Calavita.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry. It is true that we haven't had a lot of time. It's been full of all kinds of problems. But I do think that the committee, the subcommittee, has worked really hard on this, as have other members of the board. And this has been actually, we've been working on this for quite a while. So I really think, frankly, we know what the major problems are. We know that the major problem is in the impact section and in the use section. And we know that some sections aren't consistent with state law and local policy. And so I would move that we send this to council, recommending that it be provisionally accepted, but modified within 60 days, and state where it needs to be modified. And that's what I think we should do. And I don't think that we should overemphasize that we haven't had time, because I do think that a lot of people have gone through this very carefully, and we know where the problems are. And so anyway, that would be, maybe it's too early for a motion, but I.
Thank you. So that's an interesting suggestion. Director Lee, how would that function? Would that, if we were to pass that motion 60 days with an advisement of the modifications, would that buy us that additional time, buy the committee the additional time to do so?
Well, you have to consider that if you're making that recommendation and the council votes on it on June 14th, that 60 days is going to put you in August, when we're both the board and the council are in recess. So maybe it should be something like September.
Like 120 days or 90 days? Additional 30 days.
Something like that. Somebody can sort of look at the calendar and see when September, what September would be.
Okay.
But I think that makes sense. And I don't know, I guess it could go back to the subcommittee, or it could be, I guess that makes more sense, but I'm not, I guess I'm sort of hesitating. I'm not clear on exactly, not clear yet on exactly how the future work would take place. I mean, I think the motion makes sense. Now it's figuring out, okay, now how do we go from here? Lieutenant Rittenhouse has said that the chief is committed to working together on this. So maybe it would be the subcommittee sitting down with members of the department to hash things out.
Okay, and thus far, my understanding, there's not enough engagement on the issue, given the short time frames. So
I would agree with Vice Chair Meisel's observation that at subcommittee, the department did not seem willing to change. But if they get direction from council, you know, that might change that position.
Okay, so let's moving into, we have a lot of people who want to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 folks. I want to first ask Lieutenant Rittenhouse, if we were to move forward with a motion, a potential motion for, let's say, 90 days to drop it into September, or maybe even 120 days to City Council, would that provide sufficient time, given that in August the police accountability will be out, and I'm sure a lot of BPT staff will be out, to come back in like September and or October to engage with that subcommittee to review and address those concerns that were just raised by Vice Chair Meisel as well as others?
I haven't been involved in the initial stages of this, so I've got no reference for whether it's enough time or not. Likely it is. Like I
that's
said earlier, we're willing to engage on this. And so I think the chief will make resources available to work with the subcommittee for sure.
Okay. So we could probably target like 120 days or even 150 days to ensure the time. We don't want to shortcut the time. Even at 180 days, we can talk about that. But I see Board Member Moore is raising his hand.
I am. Thank you, Chair, for recognizing me. I just want to relay the seriousness of us having military equipment on the streets of Berkeley with half-cocked, half-baked protocol, regulation, description of the military equipment and how they're used on our streets. So I don't know if we should be looking out all 180 days, 150 days, 120 days without having the policy and protocols in place. So that's just something to think about.
Okay, thank you. Then we have Vice Chair Mizell.
Yes, I'll be brief, Chair. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm a bit perplexed by the statement that now the department is willing to collaborate when we just had set up a subcommittee to do that very thing. And it started with, quite frankly, and again, I will encourage you to watch the tape. I mean, there are reasons given, but the department there said more or less threatened to not participate if things did not go in the order they wanted. So then after we acquiesced to going in the order or far closer to the order they wanted and asked for changes, they said no. And now I hear at the full meeting that the department is now willing to collaborate on this issue. The board gets to make the decision it makes. I'm going to be in the reject camp. The city council gets to make the decision they make. I recommend to them they reject it. But the bottom line is now, magically, they're willing to collaborate at this meeting when they could have collaborated at the subcommittee level more. And if collaboration means we hear what you said, but we'll change absolutely nothing, then they did collaborate already. My bad, I misunderstood what collaborate meant. But quite frankly, speak only for myself now. This process has been incredibly frustrating. The statements obviously do not comport to what the policy dictates and delineates, and it should be rejected. And we should list out, as Board Member Calavita and Board Member Owens said, we should list out the reasons why, things this council should consider. I fully agree with that 100%, but I would be in the reject camp. I don't think they made that effort at that level. I think it's on tape that they were not willing to. I think it's on tape that they said, if you don't go in this way, we just won't participate and we'll leave the meeting. And now I'm hearing, oh, well, they will collaborate. At some point, we as a board have to decide whether we're simply going to push paper or whether we're going to make statements and follow through in our role.
Thank you, Vice Chair Mizell. So just follow through with that, what I'm just think through, like, because of the timing issue and the need, as Board Member Moore noted, not to have any kind of half-baked policies out there on such an important issue as this. What type of other assurances would the committee need to ensure that there is a collaboration for additional meetings with an extension of time of, say, 150 days or 180 days? It sounds like Lieutenant Rittenhouse has noted that the chief has indicated to him that she is very supportive of engagement. And I would assume that means having someone present at the subcommittee meetings. You were in some of those meetings and are reflecting in some frustration that some proposals and suggestions were made, but none of those suggestions were accepted. Is there something with regard to the process or otherwise that could be changed to help mitigate and improve the engagement?
Well, if I could briefly add, Chair. One of the reasons, again, I encourage people to watch the tape they gave was because of the timeline. They wanted to just focus on the impact statements, not look deeply into the use policies, not look too deeply into the related AB 41, AB 48 issues. We said, okay, so let's focus on the impact statements. We pointed out the exact issues. I mean, the M4 one is so obvious. It's just plain text obvious that you can't just say it's an inanimate object. That's not how impact's defined in the ordinance. And they said, I believe it's on tape. They wouldn't change it. So you have to understand, Chair, from my perspective, and I think Board Member Moore would agree with me, to now here at the full meeting when the subcommittee is presumably done and the timeline is now completely elapsed. Whoa, the department wants to engage and collaborate. They weren't willing to at the time. At least that meant changing nothing. If being there is collaborating, okay, they were there. And I do truly appreciate that. And there have been other moments in time where I have collaborated with Captain O'Reilly and have had positive movements in policy, even when we've disagreed. And sometimes we've been able to compromise on things. There was zero movement on this issue. And I find it striking to now hear that engagement is possible.
Okay. So what we have on the table right now, with that, the information that's been provided by those that write in the subcommittee, and I'm going to go to Dobby, Board Member Owens, etc. We have an assurance from Lieutenant Montgomery, Lieutenant Rittenhouse of collaboration. But we do have public statements here from members of that subcommittee and the vice chair of great concern. I don't want to use the term of impasse, but a great concern around not moving things forward under I'm understanding like good faith engagement. It could be a matter of disagreement, but I do think further conversation will be important. I think that the subcommittee is going to have to figure out some type of structure or something that with that additional time that can result in constructive outcomes with their proposals. I want to ask Vice Chair Mizell, though, and Board Member Moore, if they feel with what the frustration level that I'm hearing from them, they feel ready to do so, because I know it takes a lot of time.
No, I will not spend any more time on the subcommittee on this issue. It's on tape.
Okay. Board Member Moore?
I'm always willing to start the conversation and open dialogue, but I am 100% in line with Vice Chair Mizell's description of where we are right now and how we got here. So.
My one caveat would be is if council decides that the timeline should be extended by 60, 90 days and actually allows us to have the time, which the timeline, which the city is now, the city attorney spoken, the timeline is clear. We have to do it now. So that was the argument made in part by the department as to why we should go in their direction and we don't have time to go over certain issues, which fundamentally undermines the whole purpose of the ordinance. And the timeline was at least in limbo for a solid moment in time. So if that changes, my answer might change. But if that doesn't change, I'm not going to rush myself into last second looking at policy because the department has now decided they want to engage when both Board Member Moore, I, Director Lee, other members of staff spent the time, had the meeting. And I know the department came, and I was thankful they were there, but they were not willing to change. They threatened to leave if things did not go the direction they wanted things to go. So why, that's not real engagement. We as a board should focus on real engagement. When the department wants to do that, I'm always willing to. If they're going to tell me the same thing again, why on earth would I spend my time on that? I don't know why the board would spend their time either.
So further engagement, good faith engagement with an extension of time of perhaps 180 days, under the knowledge that there's a feeling that there is some kind of quote unquote impasse with the proposals and the advisory role of the Police Accountability Board that appears to not obstructed, that's too strong of a term, but there's a strong feeling from those that are speaking that I'm hearing that that advisory role is being thwarted. So I think that further conversation is always important, and reasonable minds may differ. Just want to make sure that we've gotten to the space of reasonable minds where the Police Accountability Board and the BPD are providing all the information and are operating under facts that are relevant towards the goal of community-based policing that ensures that important balance between civil liberties and civil rights and the police department's need for certain tools for law enforcement. I can hear the frustration here, and I know how challenging that is with putting in that amount of work and not feeling that it's being heard. So I want to state as chair that there are many people speaking about this now, and I think that it's spoken emphatically, not rhetorically, and based upon facts. I'm hearing from Lieutenant Rittenhouse that the chief is very serious about engaging on this issue. So we're asking for true good faith engagement on this issue where reasonable minds might differ, but there must be constructive engagement towards a positive change. So I'm gonna, I do see Board Member Calavita's hand is still up, but I think she had spoken earlier. And then I'm gonna go to Board Member Levine.
Well, actually,
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm responding to what I thought was a motion by Board Member Calavita, which stated approval if we can modify, et cetera, et cetera. I'm uneasy with that unless it's clear that such a modification can happen. It sounds like the police department may have had a change of heart after these meetings with our subcommittee. I could be wrong, but we're meeting on the 22nd. If the deadline's the 28th, is it possible for the subcommittee to meet again with hopefully maybe the chief directly to clarify and get a meeting of the minds on whether or not such modifications can be addressed meaningfully? Give them a second chance is what I'm saying. But I, along with Board Member Moore, would be very uneasy with these weapons being utilized without clear direction that's consistent with the state and local laws, as well as the intentions of the city, the community. You know, I looked up one of these weapons, and then I won't say anything else. And even on the manufacturer's website, there are use and consequences of these weapons that are life-threatening, and they say it. You know, there's essentially warnings. It's kind of let the buyer beware. You know, you can kill somebody with this, and if you don't do this, that, and the other thing. So there are detriments to their use and potential impacts that are severe. So I think it has to go into this guidance that the policy that the police follow.
Okay, thank you. So we do have some additional language here to kind of move us forward. Like, don't forget, we have Board Member Calavita's proposal for a motion. We're looking at number of days. I think we're going to need a little bit more time than 90 days. Right, 180 is more reasonable. And in addition, we want to have a good faith engagement and a directive essentially to the city council that these amendments be strongly considered or implemented with their feedback and the support of that directive from city council. And in addition, prior to that, an attempt to re-engage, because we're thinking that the chief does want to engage with us, and it would make a big difference, I think. I know that everybody has very busy schedules, and look here, we're here at like 9:30 in a meeting, and I'm sure the chief and BPD are busy too, but it does make a difference when the chief is available and there at these meetings. Just as with the PRC on the use of force, the chief was there almost every single meeting. So on that subcommittee. So we want to make sure that we set a time that's available to the chief for her to be present to engage. Board Member Owens, and then we want to, and Leftwich, and then Vice Chair Mizell in the back, Calvia. And then I think we want to go into the motion soon, the process for the motion. Board Member Owens?
So I'm hearing people say that you want to put it before council with a caveat that some modification has to be made within, let's just say, 120 days or whatever it is. I'm going to ask Director Lee and Mr. Chang, the city attorney's office. I don't think the ordinance allows for that, does it?
Yeah.
The ordinance says that they have to approve it within 4 regular city council meetings, or the department has to cease use of it. It doesn't, I don't believe that this ordinance allows for, well, we'll approve it if they modify it within 120 days. I don't think the ordinance allows for that. Now, if I'm wrong, somebody correct me. So I think that's why I suggest what we do is we recommend that, you know, we don't agree with it. We recommend modifications. Now, I don't even think that there's time for the subcommittee or members of the PAB to meet with the department, because apparently city council is going to hear this is like next week. Today is the 8th, and they're seeing it on the 14th. So there's not really time to sit down with the department. At least I don't think so, you know?
Right, that's a bit of a problem. It is the 14th.
I mean, Director Lee and Mr. Chang, can you let me know whether or not, is that possible to say the council can approve it with this caveat of modifications done in 120 days or whatever the number of days is? Is that even possible?
Based on what I'm reading, are you looking at 2.100.040A?
I'm looking at,
One.
100.140H2.
Can you say what page on our documents?
6. I'm looking at page 6 of the ordinance.
Say that again?
Page 6.
She wants to know a page of the packet.
Page 6 of the ordinance.
Sorry, I'm looking at the ordinance. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I don't know what page it is in the packet. So, Mr. Chang, can you answer that question?
Yes, so I'm interpreting the discussion to refer to a recommendation to approve with a commitment by the council that it take up modifications in the future. That would be the pathway under which the equipment could still be used after June 28th. Otherwise, it would be that they will not have approved it. And so that's how I've been interpreting this discussion, is that you're recommending approval with a commitment from the council that they will allow this board to work on recommendations for further modifications, and that the council would agree to take those up in the future.
So what my question is, based on what the ordinance says, can we do that? Does the ordinance allow for that, is my question. Because the ordinance seems to me, it says they have 4 city council meetings, and then they have to either approve it or the department has to stop using it. There's no they can approve it with these caveats to it
Yeah.
in the ordinance. So that's my question. Can there be caveats?
What I heard Mr. Chang say is approve it and direct, I don't
Right.
think he used this language, and direct that it come back within a certain amount of time with modifications.
Right, just as we would be recommending provisional approval. I mean, I'm looking at the ordinance now and it says, if it does not approve, well, but we're recommending a provisional approval, so they can in fact pass a provisional approval, and that would count as an approval contingent on those modifications.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that's.
I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to find a way around it.
I think that's what I'm hearing too, but what page is that on the packet? Just make sure everyone's on the same page.
188 of the packet.
Say that again?
188.
So if we're getting direction from the city attorney's office that is an option for the city council, then I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, I think we're fine tuning the motion as we're discussing it. I'm comfortable with it too. Thank you. And let's move on to Board Member Leftwich.
Well, I was going to say that our position should be reject unless modified, but that was before the prior discussion about whether or not, that would mean that the equipment couldn't be used, because it seems like there's a strong feeling of wanting to convey a rejection or a strong position. So as I said, I was going to say reject unless modified, but if that's not possible procedurally, then I guess I would go with the accept subject to an agreement to modify. As far as the timeline though, I think 180 days is way too long. So I would just say if we provide a timeline.
Yeah.
Okay. And
I was going to suggest that given the feeling that the different opinions that people have about this, well, it's not really a compromise, but I totally agree that we don't want all this stuff being used without a proper impact statement and use policy. And therefore, and furthermore, I don't think, frankly, once the department is willing to move on this, I don't think it's that these changes are that complex or would require that much. I mean, they're critical changes, but I don't think it would take them half a year to do it. So I would write into it, unfortunately, August is everybody's gone in August. Otherwise, I would say 60 days, but since, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I want to give Vice Chair Mizell and Board Member Moore enough time, but they could certainly finish it before the time frame with their engagement. But is there, Vice Chair Mizell, in terms of the time frame that we're referencing, 90 days?
I think we're having just, it's kind of like, Chair Chang, where I feel like we're having just different legal opinions here. It's like if we're writing the case, I don't think we're too far off, but my thing is, ultimately, I feel like, and again, it could have been unintentional, folks. I think it was unintentional because of issues with state law, with the complexity of city government. Things happen. I understand that, but I think the city erred and has not corrected that error and have not responded to me, at least in writing, in any way about that error. That those errors affected this process, affected the timeline. And now we're having discussions about, well, after we as the, again, I understand other people's position, but after the PAB has lost its actual oversight ability of this, our actual 90-day, our window that we were supposed to have, after it's gone, now we'll have a discussion. And after it's approved, at least conditionally, then we'll go back. To me, that's not how this ordinance was supposed to work. That's not how this ordinance was ever supposed to work. To me, it's a complete circumvention of what the ordinance was supposed to do. if this, again, the city council has the full ability to make their decision when they make it. I respect that, understand that's in the charter, understands in this ordinance. If they want to accept and ignore those issues, that is their decision. If they want to reject and find a solution, which I hope they would, that will be their decision. I don't think we should be trying to craft remedies to what, in my opinion, was a city error, which not only on the city, there are other issues, but a city error, which the city has not responded to in any formal way, which directly impacts the work of this board, which I will keep saying. It wasn't Nathan's personal vanity project to decide to write a memo in the middle of the night about this specific issue. There's no cause and action beyond attorney's fees, folks. I'm not going to get paid. And quite frankly, I can't take on the city in court. I'm not looking for a legal fight. I just wanted a remedy, or at least we're looking into it and we'll get back to you hopefully next month. Or we agree, so we're going to ask the city council to toll this while we review that issue. None of those things have happened. It's been a casual conversation with a member of the attorney's office where no concrete answers came out of whatsoever. And at least 3 weeks have been passed since then, and still nothing's been answered. And now we're at this meeting where I just came from subcommittee meetings with Board Member Moore and Director Lee, where the department was not willing to make changes, was not willing to collaborate. I don't think we should be bailing out the city for what was their mistake. And I get it. We're part of the city. I love the city of Berkeley. That's why I do this work. But if the city messes up, if the city doesn't want to participate, and then after we've lost what our independent agency, after it's gone, now we'll participate and we'll fill in the blanks. And I will spend more hours fixing this after the fact and after it's already in place, like the ordinance was not written to do. No, I would say reject. I'd say listen. So I'll make the motion. I'm sorry to grandstand. I will motion to reject the impact statements based upon the reasoning laid out by the subcommittee. So that I know Ms. Lee has, and I welcome friendly amendments to add additional comments we need to make as the board, but that's simply not our job. And either the city will acknowledge that there was some issues here or they won't. And if they don't, that's on the city.
Okay, so we have a potential. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah,
well,
was that Director Lee?
procedurally, there's a motion on the floor, although it hasn't been seconded. So I'm not sure what we consider. If we normally we would consider Vice Chair Mizell's motion a substitute motion.
Okay, so
but
it's potentially a substitute motion that could be amended. However, does someone want to first second Board Member Calavita's motion?
I didn't really provide any detail on my motion.
Would you like to do so now? And then I do know Board Member Levine. Board Member Levine, is your comment relevant to this
Yes.
issue right now? Immediate issue.
What I want to say is, if it's possible for us to approve on the condition of amendments, why can't we reject with the condition that we will be open to it, that it needs amendment, reject because of amendment, ask for the ability to amend before the August deadline. If we reject, there's going to be strong incentive to rapidly meet. The Berkeley Police want to meet with us now. Why can't we reject, but are open to amendments which could make these policies acceptable?
That's what I had proposed, to say reject unless modified.
Yeah.
I would totally agree with that.
And then can we state where the modification should be?
Well, I would totally agree with that, except that the ordinance says that the city council must approve by June 28th. And that's the reason that the language that I suggested to, now I think we should write a memo that talks about the stuff that Vice Chair Mizell has stated in terms of we've been put in this position of not of an impending deadline.
Mhm.
And it's because of this impending deadline that the PAB recommends only provisional approval contingent on these modifications. It would be preceded with a statement about how we've been put in this position of, or really the council has been put in the position also of facing this impending deadline. And it's because of the impending deadline that the PAB recommends provisional approval contingent on these modifications. And then,
Within a specified time period?
well, I would prefer 60 days. That puts us in August. So I don't know.
Why don't you say 90?
90.
Yeah, I would say 90. I think 60 puts us in August. We're not going to
90
be here.
days, but it would be this contingent approval would come with a statement about, you know, that is not ideal, but this is what we're suggesting.
Can we use language that says only if modified within 90 days?
So I have some language here. I don't have the language for the preceding paragraph about the impending deadline, but the PAB recommends only provisional approval of the impact statement only on the condition that within 90 days, the BPD make the following critical modifications. 1, the impact sections of each type of equipment needs to describe potential adverse impacts in accord with the ordinance. 2, the uses sections for chemical agents and kinetic impact projectiles need to be made consistent with Berkeley policy and state law. 3, the policies attached in the appendix, such as policy 303, controlled devices and techniques, and others, need to be updated to be consistent with state law. So that would be my motion, but it's not that I'm recommending approval. I'm recommending that the lesser of two evils here is to say we only recommend provisional approval.
Okay, so that's a motion there.
I would go the other way, recommend a reject unless these modifications are made, except for this impending deadline of June 28th.
Which we'll raise in the memo. All of this would have to be drafted pretty quickly because of the coming June 14th meeting, by the way.
Yes.
So we've done within the next few days. So you have like a really strong potential motion on the floor here. I do see 1, 2, 3 other hands, Lieutenant Rittenhouse, Vice Chair Mizell, and Board Member Leftwich. I want to state as chair, it's now 9:50. We want to be as efficient about this as possible. We know all the problems with regard to what we've just laid out with the impact, et cetera. We have a potential plan, so let's make the comments specific to going towards a motion that Board Member Calavita stated or an amendment thereof. Lieutenant Rittenhouse.
Thank you. Yeah, just real quickly, if not approved, it's my understanding that we also lose our ability to use some of our intermediate options like batons and less lethal. And some of those options actually help reduce ultimate harm. So there's been some talk about the M4 and other items, but along with it, I think there's also some very useful intermediate tools that would be prohibited if it doesn't pass. Just wanted to point that out.
Okay, thank you. Do folks have questions about that? Lieutenant Rittenhouse is suggesting that if not passed, that certain types of, I guess, effective but less lethal weapons, I might be using the wrong terminology, may not be available then to use as options, as alternatives.
And that is correct. And ultimately, if the city attorney's office had found that there had been a violation, there could have been a cure, which included more time but that has not happened and does not appear that will be happening anytime soon. So for me, and this specifically about the motion, I guess my version, it is in part addressing those things. And again, folks, I understand I filed it as an individual because there's no mechanism, to my knowledge, to file it as a board because it's an individual remedy about a violation of the ordinance. And if there had been a different process that allowed the whole board to do it, of course, I would have welcomed that and welcomed that discussion and welcomed our full approval. But being the person who had most, I believe, again, I could be wrong, most closely followed that ordinance, had worked on it at the subcommittee level before it had been approved by council with Captain Larry, I decided to take that initiative. So my motion is there. I don't know if I have a second or not, but I'll just leave it there.
So your motion is not quite there yet because Board Member Calavita has her motion that came before yours. And would you like to make an amendment?
I'll make a substitute motion. I fully respect the opinion and view of Board Member Calavita on this issue. And ultimately, council, to my knowledge, should have the ability to look at the rejection and say, okay, this bad would happen, but we're going to conditionally approve it, and conditionally approve and then have a timeline for review. They could decide to do that. We can offer that. I'm okay adding that to a reject. But
so can you, Vice Chair,
to me, accepting implies that a good amount, because to me, the only reason to do that is we're trying to dodge this deadline. And that to me is it's a feature of the ordinance that has come into play in part because of the issues we mentioned before. I won't go into that right now, but I mean, the information is just not there. I think at the subcommittee level, and again, part of this is another part where I'm in reject. We had the conversation at the subcommittee level. I'm using M4 as an example because we're able to get very specific with the M4. And there was no movement by the department whatsoever, even on the language of inanimate object, which is so obviously does not comport with the definition of impact in the ordinance. It's just an objective thing, and they would not change it. So to me, I can't even say conditionally accept when there has been no movement. I can't say conditionally accept when, again, the board can disagree with me, but I think the city made mistakes here that have not been addressed and have now put us in a crunch. Now, we've had other things to do. I'm not saying we would have had all the time in the world if it just been extended. I don't know, but we would have had more time, and we wouldn't be dealing with the issue where the department uses the deadline as a reasoning as to why we can't have a larger, more in-depth conversation about the ordinance, about the impact statements. That was one of the big reasons. Well, the deadline's coming up, just do it this way, It's literally the complete opposite of how this ordinance is supposed to work. It's supposed to work, we have that to protect our time. Not that would turn into, well, there's lack of clarity, and then the board's super busy because of a million issues. And then, oh, well, now the timeline's coming, so either do it this way or it's just going to council. So I'll leave it there. My substitute's up.
Got it, thank you. So can you restate your substitute motion? So I restate it one more time.
My substitute motion would be to reject the impact statements based upon the reasoning of the subcommittee. So Ms. Lee, it has that language, but
Okay.
one, it's essentially the same language that pretty much Board Member Calavita mentioned. The impact statements being incomplete, not mentioning any negative potential. Number two being the AB 48 state law applicability, or the comporting the policies to AB 48 other state laws. And then the third recommendation was that we should have a meeting between the different bodies in the city to address the issues in this ordinance and improve the process for the future.
And does that include, Vice Chair, I just want to make sure I understand myself.
Yes.
Would that does not include the 90 days?
I'm willing to, I'm willing to add a caveat about if we had more time, but I would still be in the reject camp. So I guess, no, it doesn't have that explicitly. I think we could write something to that effect, that if the council views this and agrees with the board that there are serious substantive issues with these statements, but perhaps does not want to reject outright because of the potential impact, that they could refer it back with a proper timeline, and preferably mandating the department actually collaborate, and doesn't say they're going to collaborate and then not collaborate and then show up at the meeting after our timeline has elapsed saying they will collaborate.
Yeah.
Vice Chair,
Don't put that in the statement or in the motion.
Right.
Vice Chair,
Yes.
Can I ask a question about, so I heard you say that you see this, I want to ask you a question about how you see this playing out in council. If we were to reject, I think I heard you say that in council, they will consider that, but then they will be hard pressed and ultimately they'll have to do some sort of approval. Is that what you're imagining will be the way it plays out?
I don't know what council would do. I have no idea what their intentions, thoughts will be, but certainly I think quite just objectively, we know that that would be a very tenuous decision for many members that weigh in a lot of different factors to reject outright because of the impact of that.
Right.
If I was a betting man,
That's what I was going to say too, but I guess for me, I feel like given the way our subcommittee has been treated, and frankly, given the way the PAB has been treated, I think it's important for us to take a strong stand. And so I still personally like the idea of reject unless modified. And we take the stand. And I do think that the council, they're going to do what they want to do. But I think they're more likely to hear us if we use the word reject. And I think it's important that we start taking a stand on these things, even if ultimately council isn't going to follow exactly what we say.
And one thing I say, Board Member Calavita, is in the past, I feel like there's been times where we've had a lot, again, the department has at other times participated, collaborated, been willing to have conversation, change things, or, give more substantive reasons as to why they wouldn't. And we've said, okay, well, we accept with modification, we accept with conditions. That didn't even happen this time. It was simply follow this direction, or we're just not going to participate, which is on tape, folks. And then it was, okay, fine, we'll go your direction. And then they said, no, well, we're just not going to change anything.
Yeah.
That's not even an attempt.
Yeah. So what we have to move on from here is clearly there's a lot of frustration here, and then there's a potential trust issue here. So we need to figure out how are we going to specifically frame this motion, which we need to do right now, because it's 10 p.m. over there. And we have much more items on the agenda, some of which we have to go into closed session. So let's get this done in the next 3 minutes. We've talked out this quite a bit, and we have an amendment of Board Member Calavita's.
No, it's a substitute. First of all, I don't think I got a second yet on.
Okay, so we have a substitute motion. Board Member Calavita, do you want to say something really quickly, and then we can talk about a second?
Yes, I do. It goes to the issue of trust and credibility as well. I think that I think it behooves us to recognize the position that council will be in and that we're in. And I totally agree with everything that everybody has said about wanting to reject, but I don't think we should reject solely because we want to take a stand and show our something. But I wonder if we couldn't say in this memo that we would prefer to reject this, given its very clear omissions and inconsistencies with law and policy. But that given the impending deadline, we would offer this provisional approval. I mean, I wonder if we can state it in such a way that it's clear that we prefer rejection, but we recognize what's happening here in terms of the deadline.
Actually was filed
So we have an amendment then to the substitution.
with the police review.
With that, and someone
No.
has their phone's not on mute.
No, I'm just,
Chair, you're confused.
No. Okay, so you're not doing an
That's
amendment.
not
to
an
sub-
amendment to the substitute motion, because the substitute motion is to reject, and Board Member Calavita's motion is to
provisional approval.
with
But I would
statement.
preface the provisional approval because I think it that's all that we
Hear
would.
what you're saying, and I guess I would feel better if we made our position very clear, if it's provisional approval, but we made very strong statements about, how this went down and the conundrum that we're in. So
Yeah.
I would be okay with that.
I mean, I can go either way, but I do think if we're looking to how it reflects on the board, I actually think it reflects better on the board to make it clear that we understand this position, the situation.
Okay, I
Instead
agree
of
with
just-
that.
yeah.
So I agree too on that. And would we be able how would that comport then directly with the motion that's been raised but has not been seconded yet? The substitute motion that's been raised but hasn't been
That
seconded.
was an addition. I took that from Board Member Calavita as an additional statement that she's adding to her motion, which
Which
needs a
never was
second,
seconded.
please.
I don't think my motion was seconded.
It wasn't.
Additional statement to your original motion.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
going back to
Her
original
motion
motion.
needs a second.
So we have to go back to
Second.
your original motion. You're
Okay.
seconding it?
Thank you.
I would second Board Member Calavita's motion based
Okay.
on what she was just
All right.
saying.
Okay,
Okay.
we have a second on that original motion with its revision.
Right. And now we have a substitute motion on the floor. Is there a second to that?
It's seconded.
Okay, thank you.
Can I get clarification on Board Member Calavita's? Does it have a time deadline for the modifications?
Well, I wanted to make it as soon as possible, but it seemed like maybe 60 days was the shortest.
Be August.
But that would be August. So then I said 90 days.
Okay.
So
I
make
don't
it
know.
90 days.
Maybe we should say 30 days, get it July.
I'm just.
No.
I don't know.
Sorry.
Comfortable with 30 days.
I mean, my concern is that when we recommend rejection, this will, what it will do is we will be taking a stand, and that's important. But in practical terms, it will be voted down at council,
Yeah,
and there will be a provisional acceptance. And frankly, that's not great for us.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. You're thinking in terms of step A, B, C, what could happen once it goes in front of the city council and what are the possible outcomes.
Well, they're not going to reject it outright.
Right. So again, it's 10:05 now. We'll want to try to wrap this up in a few minutes.
20
We have
seconds.
Great, and cool. Vice Chair Mizell, and then we have these two motions on the floor now.
I'll be really brief. Again, I think Barbara McCabe, we're just having just a disagreement about how to approach things. I think in terms of role of the board, in terms of our role, is more appropriate that we reject. And that's why I'm in the camp of reject. I'll keep it very short and simple. Yes, we understand the realities of council. Yes, we understand what they'll almost certainly do. I definitely understand it as well. But my role is, I don't feel that that's our role. Our role is to have proper oversight in this city. I don't think that happened here. And I think it's more appropriate that we reject. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Levine?
Yeah, and why can't the city council take our rejection with the narrative of why, and say, this needs modification clearly, and so how are we going to do it? And then that's my question. How is it going to get modified? What's the most likely way to get it modified? Because they're going to have some kind of policy about these military weapons, and we want to have input on what that is. But I don't want to lose our ability to have input. I guess it's just not clear to me. So I'm having trouble figuring out how to vote on this.
I thought what was contemplated was 90 days for us to work with the department.
That's what I thought I heard with Board Member Calavita's.
With Board Member Calavita's motion, right.
Okay.
And we're going to take Lieutenant Rittenhouse at his word that the chief wants to engage in this modification process. Is that what's implicit in this?
We would
That's
say
right. It's
that we have been
explicit.
advised.
Yeah.
So it's explicit in a
that
public meeting.
we're
And
relying
we've also, it's
Right.
explicit in a public meeting. And we've also asserted that it really makes a big difference. Again, knowing everybody's busy schedules, to make it available for the chief herself to attend these meetings. With Chief Greenwood under the PRC, we had many, many meetings in person in subcommittee on use of force on issues that had some time urgency and needed a lot of kind of hammering out, instead of having someone come who then has to go back, who might have some delegated authority, but functionally needs to go back and get the approval of the chief. So it makes a big difference, if at all possible, to make the schedule of the meeting so the chief is there.
Well, it seems as though that representation has been made here tonight by Lieutenant Rittenhouse. And can't we say, based on that, can't we amend Member Calavitas, or is this a friendly possibility to insert that based on the representation that the department is willing to participate in modifications, blah, blah, blah?
Who's going to write this? I'm a little unclear, because it sounds like we're going to have,
Yeah.
a lot of substance here with some history. So who's going to write that?
Not me.
I'm assuming I'm writing this.
It's going to require I know that Vice Chair Mizell has already put in a lot of work here. Whichever motion is approved, we're going to need the assistance of Vice Chair Mizell and Board Member Moore, with their lengthy experience with this recent engagement, to ensure that the new process is as likely to succeed as possible.
Could I just say that I don't see the committee doing the work. I think that this needs to be sent back to the department to rewrite those sections.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But I'm talking about
I don't think the
our memo,
committee
et
should be
cetera.
sitting down with the department and figuring out what to say. The department has to rewrite those
Yeah.
sections.
That's a good point. Plus, I don't think our committee is very eager to
Right.
attend these meetings anymore. So I think the ball's in the department's court.
Absolutely. And when the council demands it, they will be more likely to do it.
Okay, so we
Okay.
have the two motions on the floor.
Right, are we ready to vote on the substitute motion?
I think we should be, because we've been talking about this for like an hour and a half. I'm exaggerating. I don't know how long, but it feels like an hour and a half. Okay, so the
Okay.
first motion by Board Member Calavita.
No, we have to procedurally, we have to vote on the substitute motion first.
Is that right? Okay, that's interesting.
Yes, I'm pretty sure I'm right about that.
Okay, so the substitute motion, which came later in time, which is Vice Chair Mizell's a motion that was then seconded by Board Member Moore.
Yes.
And does anybody need a quick review again, like a 2-minute, 1-minute spiel again of what that motion is?
Yes.
Okay.
It is the language that is more or less in Director Lee's memo, which, number one, reject because of the impact statements, the lack of information, the lack of negative impacts, other issues with impact. But that's number one. Number two, ensure that the policy reject because the policies need to fully comport with AB 48 and other applicable state laws. And then three was, well, I guess this one's not a part of the reject, but recommend that the city attorney, the department, and us have a meeting and really discuss this ordinance and how to streamline it in the future. I mean, I do imagine that, you know, we'll be able to present something to council and hopefully explain some of these issues if we go that direction. And again, I imagine they will think of ways to respond to us. But that is what's in the motion.
Okay,
Thank you, Vice Chair.
calling the roll on that substitute motion. Calavita,
I don't know.
do you pass?
But you
I abstain.
Okay.
can't. But you made the first motion, which he's
No
essentially
arguing, I'm calling the roll. Chang?
Okay, keep going. I'm going to say I appreciate Vice Chair.
Yes or
No
no,
words.
or
I'm going to say
abstain?
nay.
Thank
Nay.
you.
I really understand where he's coming
Harris?
from. But nay.
Yes.
Leftwich?
Reluctant, no.
Everybody's gonna editorialize. Levine,
Abstain.
Mizell,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
and Batista, Owens, sorry,
No.
and Batista.
I'm going to vote yes.
Okay, I've got.
Not enough.
The motion carried. That
You said the
was
motion carried?
Harris, I got Harris, Levine, Mizell, Moore, and Baptista. Is that right? Who voted aye? No, not Levine.
No.
Okay,
I
sorry.
abstained.
Yes, you
didn't
abstained,
abstain.
sorry.
So what's the bottom
Okay,
line?
so the motion failed. I had,
What was
okay, the aye votes I had were Harris, Mizell, Moore, and Baptista.
Harris, Mazel, Moore, and Baptista. Okay, 4.
That's
Actually,
four.
does abstain change the math though?
Yeah,
You need the number of folks who voted.
maybe it should.
Can we vote on board member Calavitas?
We're not sure the outcome of this.
Well, we have
Point
to
of
figure
order,
out.
does
this.
abstain change the math numbers?
Well, that's a good question. Mhm.
Yeah, because it
I
might.
don't know. Let's see.
I don't have my Robert's rules. Where's Benita?
Board member Levine, you want to stay on your abstain?
Pardon me?
Do you want to stay on your abstain or do you want to make a commitment, either yes or no? No pressure.
I'm abstaining.
Miss Thomas, my Robert's rules is on the top shelf of my bookcase.
Okay. Maybe the city attorney can advise us on this question.
That's a
Mr.
good question too.
Yes. In the
Yes,
meantime,
I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it right now.
Oh,
Yes, give me
okay.
just a moment.
I'm consulting with Google.
It seems like an important issue like this shouldn't pass with 4 affirmative votes.
Then you should change your vote to no.
Well, that would still,
Sorry, this is a lawyerly answer. Unless the body has rules that count the votes as but as a majority of the members present, then an abstention is not counted as part of the vote. So ordinarily, you're looking at only the votes. You exclude the abstention.
Oh, we do have a rule.
It depends on the.
Yeah, I think we do, but I don't remember what it is right now,
The
unfortunately.
standing rule, I think the charter actually says all action must be by majority
Majority of what, though?
of board members.
of those present,
No, I don't
or
think
those,
so.
A
But that
majority.
would be
matter because we
it would have to be unanimous.
No, majority. Who said unanimous?
No, if it was a quorum, if it has to be a majority, if
Oh,
it was
yeah.
a quorum was present, then it would have to be unanimous.
That's true, but I think that's what.
So that can't be right.
See, the problem is, and maybe tell me to shut up, but the problem is that we're trying to prognosticate what's going to happen in the council. And we just don't know. And we don't know how this timeline is impacted in terms of making real changes to the policy. We don't want to approve it if real changes aren't made, because they haven't given us all the information. They haven't written the complete impact and use of this equipment. They haven't said what it can do that could hurt people. So we're trying to hypothesize something that we don't know the answer to. And that's why it's difficult, and that's why I'm abstaining.
Yeah, looking at the charter, Director Lee.
Did you find it?
So, I mean, I think it says here at 13B, a majority of appointed board members constitute a quorum to conduct business and take any action. We have a majority of board members.
Right.
And my reading, again, I promise I'm not trying to read it just to pass my thing, but my reading of that is that's just to take any action in a meeting. So like how we needed enough members to start the meeting. And obviously we still have enough members to take a vote. So I think then we defer to whatever Robert's Rules says about abstentions, I believe.
Okay, I'm looking at 13B. A majority of appointed board members constitutes a quorum to conduct business and take any action.
Okay.
I have always interpreted that to mean a majority of board members must vote to take any action.
Got to be a majority of those present, though.
Because, well, it doesn't really matter. You have 9.
What happens if there's 6 of us at the meeting?
I think you'd still need 5 votes.
How many are at this meeting? 8?
No, you have 9 because you've got your alternate.
Oh, that's right. We've got the alternate. And so we have 4 yes. How many no's?
3.
I was no.
4 yes, 3 no's, and 3
Owen's a no.
abstentions.
All right, so 4.
Maybe it
There's 4 no's.
I'm sorry, it was 4 no's?
4 no's.
Okay, it's me.
So I'm going to change my vote to no.
I mean, oh, I'm sorry.
No, we had 3
Right.
no's, right?
Now we have 4 no's.
No's.
Now we have
4
4
yeses.
no's.
But that doesn't make any difference, does it?
Yeah.
It's 4-4?
Yeah, it does, because there's no
Yeah.
majority vote.
And
And
then
I'm
the
just-
vice chair gets to break the tie.
But the problem is,
It's in the charter. No.
the problem is that my motion also will be a tie.
Mm-hmm.
We have to act on this.
Yeah, okay. So that's number one, let's make sure everybody understands the rule. We're saying that
We don't know that your motion will be a tie because we don't know what board member.
Yeah, how do you know?
you're thinking
Well,
they'll
the
fall
way
on the same
the
line.
way I figure it, and I respect Board Member Levine's position, and that way I figure it is she's not comfortable voting on this either way. And so I think
On
it would
this
be,
one, and then the intent would be to vote on the other one.
I know, but the other, I think if I vote no on this, it'd be 4-4. And mine also will be 4-4.
With an abstention still?
Okay, well, I think we have agreement with your vote change, then it doesn't, the motion fails, right?
Okay, so let's quickly explain that. And then,
Yeah.
so it goes back to the Robert's Rules baseline rules.
Right, so you're saying that an abstention counts as a negative, right? Is that what you've come to?
Me?
Well, No, what we're reading the charter, which says a majority of appointed board members constitutes a quorum to conduct business and take any action. And the reason that I interpret that to mean that a majority has to take, you have to have a majority of the board to take any action is because the PRC was different. And so it seemed to me that there was a deliberate change in that. Under the PRC, you need a majority of those present to take action. And so theoretically, you could have 4 people. Like if 6 people showed up, 4 people could vote to take some action, which would not be a majority of the full commission, although it was a majority of those present. And so
could there be could there be a substitute motion in which we reveal that the board as a whole agrees that this impact statement has serious problems and list the problems that we've all agreed exist, and then say indicative of the countervailing pressures here, time pressures, 2 votes were taken, and say it was 4-4-1, 4-4-1 on each of these votes. And what there is unanimity on is that modifications have to be made.
I would agree with that.
And then just present to council, we struggled with this and we had 2 motions, 2 proposals. What they had in common was that they recognized the same omissions and the same inconsistencies in the impact statement and the necessity that it be modified.
I second Board Member Calavita's motion.
Okay, then make sure procedurally that we're.
I don't want to write that, but I trust that Kathy will do a great job writing that up.
So
I like that because that's really just telling council what happened.
That's telling the truth. It's talking about what a struggle it was, and we don't want to have to reject it. On the other hand, we don't want to approve of it. But what we agree on is that these particular modifications have to be made.
okay, so is that a third, Director Lee, for
yes, but
process-wise?
that presupposes that it was 4-4-1 on the first motion, the
we
original
haven't done
motion.
yet.
All right.
So we need to take a vote on that, and then we can vote. I wouldn't call it a substitute motion. I would call it.
We need to reference the vote. Can't we just say that we were divided, but we all agree on X?
We don't know if we're divided yet because we don't have the outcome yet. Just want to.
Let's vote on this, and then we can
okay. So on the original motion, everybody.
Board Member Calavita.
Commissioner Calavita's motion. Okay. Calavita?
Yes.
Chang?
Yes.
Harris?
Yes.
Oh.
Leftwich?
Yes.
Levine?
Abstain.
Mizell?
No.
Moore?
No.
Owens?
Yes.
And Batista?
No.
Can I just ask a question? I'm sorry. I thought we were, can you just tell me again, Kathy? Because I might have misunderstood.
This was the original one, right? Not what was
I was
just
voting on.
Yeah, Board Member Calavita's
Board
original
Member
motion.
Calavita's main original motion.
Oh, I thought we were voting on Mizell's original. I mean, his, okay.
No, we voted on Mizell's.
So the original version, the original motion for Calavita.
Right.
Yeah, that's what we're
Provisional approval.
provisional approval. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a no, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so that's.
Sorry
one,
about that, you
two,
guys. I thought we were voting on
four.
something else.
I was like,
Okay.
oh, Regina changed her mind. We're in.
Not that easy, not that easy.
All right, so that's 4, 4, and 1. So, okay, now
you can say.
No.
Now, Board Member Calavitas made a new motion.
Which is that we discuss the challenges of reaching a consensus on, or I'm sorry, it's very late.
Yeah, it's hard.
The challenges posed by the complexity of this and the impending deadline. The board was unanimous on the need for modifications. But they took 2 votes on 2 motions, each of them ending with a 4-4-1 vote. And these, you know, I can't write this thing in my head right now, but you all
say
know.
something about all of the board members shared a serious concern. You know, there's significant flaws. I mean, let's use some strong language.
Yeah. So we're not saying yay or nay with this,
No,
right?
no.
Yeah.
We're saying that what we can agree on is that it needs modifications along these lines, 1, 2, 3, that we've already talked about.
Yes.
And
okay.
And Director Lee, you could. This is all on tape because I think the way Board Member Calavita articulated it just before we took that last vote
Right.
was very good. So, so it's recorded. We can, you know.
The first time.
So, I think we all know what we want.
Yes. Okay, so let me just make sure people were in agreement with those 3 points of Board Member Calavitas, which, to tell you the truth, I didn't get quite everything.
The impact.
Could you just repeat that for the record? That would be helpful.
Yeah. So 1, the impact sections of each type of equipment need to describe potential adverse impacts in accordance with the ordinance. Number 2, the uses sections for chemical agents and kinetic impact projectiles need to be made consistent with Berkeley policies and state law. 3, the policies attached in the appendix, such as policy 303, controlled devices and techniques, and other policies attached need to be updated to be consistent with state law.
Okay, thank you. And I think that.
Can I just ask real quick, were those all of the things, all of the areas that we needed to address from the committee members?
Might be more, right?
Those were
the ones that are that you have to decide on tonight. I can barely talk now myself. Yeah. You'll have to talk about the annual report at your next meeting, unfortunately.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We'll look at the agenda when we get back to it. Okay.
Okay. So on that motion,
I'm sorry. I need not to read out of the 3 sections, but what is the tagline, the first line of this motion?
Well, Board Member Calavita started with the board discussed the challenges posed by the complexity of this task and the impending deadline. The board had there was unanimity on the modifications that are needed. Although then she repeated, that was repeated.
Well, I would say there was unanimity in the nature of the substantive omissions and lapses.
Yeah.
And inconsistencies with Berkeley policy and state law.
Yeah, very good.
And unanimous that these things need to be modified and corrected.
And that 2 votes were separate votes were taken and failed.
And that there was a great deal of ambivalence because many board members did not want to reject given the impending deadline, nor did they want to approve given these omissions. Flaws, thank you.
Flaws.
Yeah,
Serious flaws.
Is that,
serious flaws, yeah.
okay, Vice Chair Mizell, does that,
I'm going to vote no, and I may be alone, but I'm going to vote no.
okay. Okay, so I'm calling the roll on that motion. Calavita,
Yes.
Chang,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Leftwich,
Yes.
Levine,
Yes.
But
Mizell,
then that implies that there's not unanimous agreement about.
Well, no, this particular motion. No, that's okay.
Don't reject it. We don't accept it.
Then I have to explain why I voted no.
We don't say that this vote was unanimous.
Moore,
He said yes.
he said yes.
You're on mute.
Okay,
but-
you're muted.
Yes.
Okay, Owens
Yes.
and Batista. Ms. Batista?
I'm a yes with deep gratitude for co-chair, Vice Chair Mizell.
Okay. All right.
I
That
don't know how to
motion,
vote though. I don't think I voted yet. I don't know how to vote. I'm being honest.
wait, you said no. Wait, I thought you said no.
Well, that's what
Well,
he
I said no before the
That
vote,
was-
and then I realized the saying no mean will that be interpreted as me not agreeing with the substantive issues?
Oh,
He's again, I don't get to write like a dissent about why.
right. You correct. You do
Let
not.
me abstain. Let me abstain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is not the Supreme Court, sorry.
Okay, are we done with that?
Okay.
I think
Looks
we're
like we,
done.
yeah, well,
Thank you.
at least done with the motion. Yeah, then it's going to have to be drafted. All right.
Kathy, I'm going away tomorrow for a week and will not be available.
I will.
I'm sorry.
How convenient for you. I've got the, I have the recording.
Okay, and you're gonna send it to me as well, but also,
It's gonna, yeah, I'll run it by, well, it'll have your name on it, Chair.
Sure,
Oh,
and
no, actually, let's see. Let me think this through. I guess it's a memo to council, yeah, with your name on it.
okay,
It has to be
and
submitted. You know, ideally, I would get it in by Monday. It'll make the supplemental 2 packet.
okay, and I think we could also, I think you'll be fine, but if we need to reach out to the 2 subcommittee members for additional language, if necessary.
No, it's all there. I have to go back
Okay.
and listen. And I typed as much as I could.
Okay.
It's also on tape when I asked the chief for Captain Roleri, that I wanted to collaborate. And I specifically asked for him for those reasons, and then we did not collaborate. And now we're saying we're going to collaborate. I just hope that is very clear on the record that is what
Yes.
took place. And as city council, the story should not become, well, the department was willing to collaborate, but then the PAB just went, no.
Yeah.
It's on tape. And whoever
on-
presents that day, it needs to be said. That's all I have to say.
Okay, well, you know, there's always, every individual board member has the opportunity to speak at public comment on this.
That's right. Yeah, you can make sure that's the 14th, right? Okay,
Individual board members can also speak to their nominators.
Nominators, correct.
that's right. We can provide them an
Right.
update and they're on council. Okay,
Okay, are we moving on?
yes, we
Yes, we're
definitely
moving
are.
on.
So we are now at public comment. And hang on a second, let me get the timer ready.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, here
I'm
we
allowing
go.
John Lindsay Pullen to speak.
Okay.
So first of all, I just want to express my deep respect for each of you. I've listened this whole conversation, and I bow deeply to each of you for keeping your integrity, for struggling, for paying attention. It's hard, and I really appreciate it. One thing that was not addressed that I believe the council referred to you is the AB 481 policy, which the subcommittee suggested might go to the Lexipol subcommittee. So I don't know what that means in terms of your meeting on June 22nd, but I do think it does need to be addressed, and the council might raise it. They might expect that what you're bringing back for next week includes that, and it doesn't. Although you could say, you could reference the subcommittee's recommendations. Something that has not been, I think what Member Micel said a lot, but a lot of what happened here began because the department put this on the council's agenda for May 10th, and that was not a legitimate action under the ordinance. And that's what started the clock. That's the problem with the city attorney's interpretation here, in my view. And that is something that I think should be expressed clearly to the council so that the council understands why this time crunch was created for the PAB. I'm really glad that you mentioned that accountability board members can speak to the council both before and during the council meeting. I strongly believe that is going to be necessary because that there are going to be council members and members of the public who say, oh, those crazy accountability board members don't want our police department to be able to respond to an active shooter incident, and a bunch of them voted to reject this. That's, if you have to counter that frame, and that what doesn't come through, and what I heard that you approved is the way in which the department played you, the way the narrative that Nathan laid out of how the department was very disingenuous. At least the evidence strongly indicates that. So I would strongly suggest that you do those conversations with council members and speak in public. Super important. We will do everything we can to bring other members of the public there, but your credibility is central also, and you will bring it because you've had this experience within the accountability board, and members of the public will back you up.
Thank you. And next we have Charles Clark.
Members of the board, thank you. I look forward to seeing what this memo looks like. I guess I'm still fixed on the subject of the impact portion of the impact statements because the statutory language asks for any potential impacts that the use of controlled equipment might have on the welfare, safety, civil rights, and civil liberties of the public. Now, I think it would be useful for you to spell out to the department just how nervous or paranoid or persecuted or distrustful or jaundiced toward the police this hypothetical bystander is supposed to be. There's some suggestive language in Mr. Lindsay Pullen's memo that appears in the supplemental. That might be a good guide if that is indeed what you're adopting. I call your attention to the annual report. I'm sorry that the subcommittee didn't have time to take a look at it because you'll see 47 instances where the department deployed controlled equipment in 2021. And I guess my question to you is, what is the alternative in the various scenarios? Will that justify rejecting the use policies or the impact statements that have been offered? Where is the deficiency? I guess that's my major takeaway from this meeting is you state that the deficiencies are practically self-evident. You didn't say self-evident, but you've been speaking about them as if they were self-evident. And I'll be honest, they don't contain any negative impacts in there, but that's because, as I said at the top of this meeting, the police department cannot tell what the impact will be of the sorts that you are talking about. So I think guidance from this board to the police department about what the deficiencies really are would be very useful in this memo. Thank you very much. This was a very enlightening meeting, but I think there's still more light to be shed on this subject. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And it looks like those are the only folks that have public comment. So not seeing anybody else, so I'm going to stop share here, and we are going to, I believe, shift into closed session. Yes.
Yes.
So we're going to have
So we need
to
to ask, yeah, all
folks to depart.
attendees to leave. And we will also be asking Lieutenant Rittenhouse and Mr. Chang to leave.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for everybody for coming.
Ms. Palatnik and Mr. Yamaguchi, I'm going to have to remove you if you don't leave on your own.
Okay. So it looks
So
like the
let
attendees
me-
are all gone.
Yeah, let me